Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Rachel Morris. I'm 32 years old. This happened in late October of 2024. Just as the leaves began to turn in the Ouachita Mountains of eastern Oklahoma, near Talihina. I'm a freelance nature photographer, and that's why I originally came out here. Though, I'll admit, I also wanted to get away from the noise of people and my own personal failures. I left behind everything familiar, bringing only my trusted German Shepherd, Ivy, and enough camera gear to capture some of the hidden beauty of those dense, piney woods. I had no way of knowing what waited for me under the branches of that old oak tree. By the time I left, I was changed forever. I first learned about the area from a ranger station pamphlet that hinted at seldom visited corners in the Ouachita National Forest. There was one short mention, half hidden in a list of less popular trails, about a place called Post Mountain Trail. The pamphlet described the route as moderately difficult and rarely used. That made it perfect. Less foot traffic meant fewer tourists scaring off wildlife. I'd get better photos, maybe sell some of them to the small magazine that occasionally picked up my work. The plan was simple. I'd drive my old Jeep up the winding roads, find a clearing near a rumored giant oak called the Widow's Root, set up camp for a few days, photograph the sunrise and wildlife, and then make my way home. I had left a note in my apartment in Tulsa, letting anyone who got worried know where I'd gone, though I never expected them to need it. Ivy, my 5-year-old German Shepherd, sat in the back seat with her head half out the window, sniffing the brisk October air. As I navigated the increasingly isolated roads, it felt like we slipped gradually off the map. My phone signal started to flicker in and out until it finally died altogether. The GPS app had a meltdown, throwing me in a loop with contradictory instructions. By the time I decided to rely on the pamphlet's paper map, I was already partially lost, though I told myself it was part of the adventure. I reached the clearing around mid-afternoon. The area was indeed isolated. I saw no other cars, no sign of campers or hikers. This appealed to my sense of solitude, so I shrugged off any nerves. According to the pamphlet, the famous oak was only about a mile further in from where I parked. However, the last stretch was more of a deer trail than anything. Despite the difficulty, I found what looked like a decent campsite near the massive oak around 3 in the afternoon. The tree was everything the pamphlet promised. Its trunk a huge, twisting mass of bark, branches stretching in all directions, the highest leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. I've always loved old trees, but this one had a somber presence, like standing beneath a silent giant. There was a reason, I'd later discover, that some of the locals called it the Widow's Root. I pitched my tent a safe distance away, hammered in the stakes, and gave Ivy water. The forest around us felt hushed, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to brush away that uneasy feeling. I had been alone in forests before, though usually in less remote areas. This time, truly alone, every crack of a branch made my heart race a little. As evening settled, I built a small campfire. The wood I gathered from fallen branches was mostly dry, so it flared up easily. I took out my camera for some test shots, pictures of Ivy, the tree, the dimming sky. Then I noticed something odd. In each of my shots, a faint smudge hovered at the right edge of the frame, almost like a smudged fingerprint on the lens. But it wasn't on the lens. I cleaned everything thoroughly, took another shot, and it was still there in the same spot. Eventually, I decided it was likely an artifact of the light or sensor glitching. I gave up trying to fix it for the night. Later, I was making a simple dinner of canned soup over the fire when Ivy suddenly growled. The hair along her spine shot up in a rigid line. She stared at the oak tree. I looked in that direction and heard nothing, just the hush of the forest and the gentle crackle of my fire. Yet Ivy wouldn't calm down. I had to hold her by the collar to keep her from pacing around the perimeter of the campsite. Finally, she settled, but she never looked away from the tree. I chalked it up to typical dog suspicion. Maybe she smelled a fox or a raccoon. That night, I slept in my tent with Ivy curled up at my feet. The air was cold, and I remember being particularly grateful for her warmth. I drifted off sometime after midnight. At one point, I thought I heard a muffled cry or scream in the distance, but when I opened my eyes, there was only silence. Sleep tugged me back under. I woke the next morning to find my sleeping bag halfway unzipped, as if I had gotten out in the night. Only, I didn't remember doing that. Ivy stood at the entrance of the tent whining to go out. When I crawled out, the campsite looked normal, except for one small detail. My camera bag, which I'd left inside the tent, was on the opposite side of the fire pit. I checked to see if I had misplaced it. The tent's zipper was drawn, as if I had sealed it from the inside. I had no memory of moving the bag. Nothing seemed missing, though. The memory cards were still in there, battery was drained, which was weird because I'd fully charged it before leaving. I tried to chalk it up to me messing around half asleep, or maybe I forgot to charge the battery all the way. Still, that uneasy feeling grew. Ivy kept her distance from the oak. She even barked at it once, which made me feel foolish for jumping. But I was determined to continue as planned. I made coffee, had a quick breakfast, and then set off to explore the surrounding area for good photography spots. A couple hours later, I was kneeling near a fallen log, photographing mushrooms growing in a pattern around some moss, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Rachel, is that you?" At first, I was sure I imagined it. Then I heard it again. My heart gave a startled jolt. I wasn't expecting to see anyone, much less someone who knew me. I turned to see Maya Reynolds, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. She was wearing hiking boots and a canvas backpack, her auburn hair tied in a ponytail, cheeks flushed. She looked just as stunned as I felt. "I can't believe it," she said. "I got your message about your trip. I thought I'd come and surprise you." That's when I remembered a throwaway text I'd sent to a few old friends about my adventure, half joking that they could join me if they were crazy enough. I never dreamed Maya would actually show up. Part of me was happy. Another part of me felt unsettled. Something in the forest felt so deeply private. But I'd never been in a truly remote area alone before, and I suspected some company would help keep my imagination in check. We walked back to my campsite. Maya joked about having trouble finding me, complaining that her phone battery died soon after she arrived in the general area. She was using a paper map and a compass to navigate. "Like the old days," she said with a grin. While we caught up on each other's lives, I noticed Ivy constantly sniffed Maya's pants, as if searching for an unfamiliar scent. When I asked if she had a dog, Maya said no, but she often pet sat for her sister. That was probably it, I figured. Maya asked if she could share my campsite for a few days, to which I agreed. I helped her pitch her smaller, single-person tent. It felt nice to have her around. She was always the practical one in college. I was the dreamy photography major. She was the one who studied environmental sciences and often corrected me about the names of plants or animals. Being around her made me feel a bit safer, as if I were just on a casual camping trip, not in a place where weird night screams might creep into my tent. That evening, the two of us set up a bigger campfire. She produced a battered travel guitar from her pack. We sat around as she strummed a few out-of-tune chords. It was the sort of moment you dream about. Out in nature with a good friend, no distractions except the crackle of flames. Ivy, however, paced at the edge of the firelight, fixated on the oak again. That giant tree loomed overhead, half of its branches bare. The wind made the leaves that remained rustle with a low hiss. A few times Maya thought she heard someone screaming in the distance, but she dismissed it as a fox's cry. I wasn't so sure. The second night was when everything went from unsettling to horrific. The day had been filled with more strange mishaps. My camera memory cards, randomly corrupted, half the photos I took appeared as black squares. Our firewood went missing. My watch was running backward in the afternoon. Maya tried to explain it away as condensation or mechanical malfunction, but something in the air felt deeply wrong. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun set, and I remember huddling inside my sleeping bag with Ivy for warmth. I heard Maya zip herself into her tent. We turned off our flashlights, letting the flickering embers of the fire die down. It felt like I'd only just closed my eyes when I heard a piercing shriek. Not a human cry, not an animal call, but something that resonated in my bones. I scrambled out of the tent, shining my flashlight around. The oak tree's trunk seemed to shimmer in the beam, as if it had grown slick with water. The very air around us felt warped. My vision swam momentarily. I heard Ivy barking, ferocious and terrified at the same time. I stepped forward and realized the bark of the tree was shaped almost like a tortured face. Of course, it had to be my imagination. I was half asleep and scared. Maya stumbled out of her tent, eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I didn't know how to answer. We circled around the base of the oak, looking for any sign of an intruder. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it must be a mountain lion or some other animal. Not entirely out of the realm of possibility, but neither of us slept well after that. I kept drifting off only to wake minutes later, sure that hours had passed. The night stretched like taffy, refusing to end. When dawn finally broke, it felt like a relief, or so I thought. We unzipped our tents and discovered that a few items, my stove, a spare bag of dog food, Maya's water filter, were scattered around the clearing, as if something had dragged them from their places. Ivy had a small cut on her flank, probably from thrashing around in the night or from some branch. But the strangest part was the expression on Maya's face. She looked at the items, at my dog's wound, and her eyes almost sparkled with fascination. Instead of fear or concern, I saw something close to curiosity, the way a scientist might examine a new specimen. It was subtle, but it stuck in my mind. Later that same day, Maya offered to collect more firewood. We'd used a lot of ours the previous night to keep the flames high, hoping the light would ward off whatever lurked out there. I gave her a quick hug and told her to be careful. She left with a hatchet and a small bundle of rope. Ivy and I stayed behind to pick up the campsite and try to salvage any gear that had been damaged in the night. I tried turning on my phone to check the time, but the battery was dead again. The digital watch I brought as backup kept flickering random numbers. I eventually gave up and stuffed them both away, resigned to having no sense of time. An hour passed, or maybe 2. I couldn't tell. Maya didn't return. I started to get worried, pacing around the clearing, occasionally calling her name. I half expected to see her come strolling back with that grin of hers, telling me I was a worrywart. But the woods were silent, eerily so. No wind, no birdsong, just the faint rustling that seemed to come from the ground itself. Ivy stayed close, occasionally letting out low whines. Finally, I decided to go look for her. I ventured deeper into the woods, calling for Maya every few steps. All I found were snapped branches, random footprints that could have been hers. The forest canopy blocked so much light that it felt later in the day than it probably was. Or maybe it was earlier. Time felt meaningless. Every step I took seemed to repeat itself, like I was walking in circles no matter which direction I tried. Then I spotted a figure standing behind a cluster of slender trees. My heart soared. Maya. I hurried toward her, relief loosening the tension in my shoulders. But as I got closer, my relief turned to dread. She stood unnaturally straight, her arms limp at her sides. She stared blankly in my direction. That was the first sign something was wrong. Her eyes were too wide, unblinking. "Maya?" I called softly. She didn't respond. She only smiled, a slow, too large smile that stretched her lips until the skin at the corners looked like it might tear. Her eyes fixed on me, but there was no recognition there, or if there was, it was twisted into something else. Her hair was damp, though I didn't recall any rain. The hatchet she had taken lay at her feet. "Where were you?" I asked, approaching carefully. "Are you hurt?" She parted her lips, but no words came out, just a shallow exhalation. "Maya?" I repeated. Ivy let out a warning bark, hackles raised again. That's when Maya's eyes flicked to the dog, and for a moment I thought I saw her pupils dilate. She bent down, scooping up the hatchet in one fluid motion, her body language eerily stiff. Then she turned and walked toward our camp without a word. I hurried after her, mind racing. Something had happened to her. Maybe she hit her head, maybe got disoriented. But I couldn't shake the primal fear that told me to keep my distance. She reached the clearing, placed the hatchet near the fire pit. Then she sat on a log, still wearing that slight smile. Her eyes followed Ivy, who kept her distance, growling softly. "Maya, talk to me," I said, voice shaking. I tried to gently place a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched and jerked away, letting out a low hiss. A new wave of panic shot through me. This was not normal shock or confusion. This was something else. Night fell far too quickly. Or maybe I wasn't tracking time properly anymore. The sky went from a pale gray to inky black in what felt like minutes. I tried to light the fire, but each time I got the flames going, the wood hissed and crackled in a weird way before going out. The one time I managed a steady flame, it burned with a bluish tint, hardly giving off any warmth at all. Maya just sat there in silence, occasionally turning her head to stare at me with that vacant grin. At one point, I rummaged through my supplies for a flashlight. I discovered that my bag of food was rotting. Everything. Sealed crackers, freeze-dried meals, covered in a slimy mold that dripped black fluids. My canteen smelled sulfuric. It was as though time had advanced for the food, but not for me. Terrified, I tried to feed Ivy some jerky I had in my pocket, which looked okay, but she wouldn't eat it. She just whined and looked at Maya, who continued to stare into nothingness. To distract myself from mounting hysteria, I decided to check Maya for injuries, in case she was in shock. "I'm going to see if you got cut or something," I said softly, inching toward her. She didn't move. I gently pulled up her sleeve, but she batted my hand away with surprising force. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the remains of our fire pit. Ivy barked. That's when Maya turned her head to look at the dog. Slowly, methodically, she stood up. Her eyes locked on Ivy. "No," I said in a panic, stepping between them. Maya bared her teeth, an animalistic expression that made her face look unrecognizable. In a sudden burst of movement, she lunged toward Ivy. Her hands closed around the dog's neck, lifting her front paws off the ground. Ivy snarled, jaws snapping, but Maya twisted away from the teeth. I screamed, grabbing for Maya's arms, trying to pry them off. I remember yelling for her to stop, to snap out of it. Ivy bit Maya's arm, but Maya showed no sign of pain, no scream, no flinch. She squeezed tighter, choking the life from my dog. I fought like hell, punching and pulling, but it was like wrestling a statue. At the last moment, Ivy raked her claws across Maya's side and Maya stiffened. Then came a sickening crack. Ivy's body went limp, still in Maya's grip. A sharp whine escaped my dog's throat, followed by silence. Just like that, my companion was gone. My entire body convulsed with horror. I let out a scream that echoed through the clearing. Maya dropped Ivy's body and slowly turned back to me. I staggered backward, tears burning my eyes, the weight of helplessness crushing me. The woman in front of me, I could hardly call her Maya, smiled. Not a grin of triumph, but a disturbingly calm, quiet smile. Her eyes rolled back, and from her throat came a raspy whisper. She was a vessel too weak. I stumbled to my tent, frantically searching for something to defend myself with. My mind raced with possible explanations. Possession, madness, something supernatural. I had no illusions that I could reason with her. The thing that wore Maya's face was beyond reason. It was something old and malevolent, a presence that seemed to radiate from the oak, from the very ground we stood on. I managed to grab my hunting knife. It felt tiny and useless in my trembling hand. "Stay back," I warned, voice cracking. Maya watched me with curiosity, that grin never fading. Then she whispered something in a voice that was partly her own, partly something else. "Why do you resist? All must feed the mother." She took a step forward. I swung the knife in front of me, not daring to actually strike, but with another unnatural burst of speed, she knocked the blade out of my hand and shoved me. I landed hard on my back, pain lancing up my spine. She loomed over me, the silhouette of her body stark against the faint blue glow of the useless fire. Just when I thought it was over, she paused, looking toward the oak tree as if listening to something. Her posture slackened. Then she turned and walked into the darkness, leaving me on the ground, gasping and sobbing. I had no idea why she spared me, but I wasn't about to question it then. All I could think of was that my beloved Ivy lay dead a few feet away. For a long time I lay there in shock, the forest silent around me. Finally, adrenaline kicked in. I had to do something. Part of me wanted to run blindly through the woods until I found help, but another part warned me that it was night, and time was acting strangely here. If the environment was twisted, I could walk in circles forever. I don't know what compelled me to move toward the oak tree. Some primal part of me seemed to realize that the tree was the source or the key to whatever had happened to Maya. I grabbed my flashlight from the ground, only half functional, flickering with each step, and I headed for that towering silhouette. The bark glistened as if coated in dew. My every step felt heavier as I approached. I started hearing faint moans, or maybe distant screams, carried on a breeze that smelled like rotting leaves. At the base of the trunk, the earth looked disturbed, as if someone or something had dug around the roots. A hollow opening yawned between two thick sections, large enough for a person to slip through. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of what lay inside, bones, some of them obviously animal, but others heartbreakingly human. Skulls with ragged openings, limbs half buried in the mud. It was a mass grave. The stench that hit me made me gag. I recognized a shredded piece of fabric that looked like a shirt or dress from another time. That's when I remembered an old line from the pamphlet. Locals say a mourning mother once hanged herself from the oak, searching for her missing child. Could this be her final resting place? Or had she been something else all along? My mind refused to fully grasp it, but I knew there was an entity here. Moira. The name sprang into my head from nowhere. A sensation of bitter grief and hunger pressed on my thoughts, as if this Moira was reaching into me. Banshee, ghost, demon, whatever you'd call it, it was beyond normal. I felt a flicker of movement behind me and spun around, raising the flashlight. Maya stood there, head tilted, eyes black in the flicker of the beam. Her left arm hung at a strange angle. The place where Ivy had bitten her looked swollen and raw, yet she showed no pain. "She needs a child," Maya rasped. Her voice didn't even sound human. I turned, shining the light into the hollow, and saw the faint form of a gaunt figure. She was crouched among the bones, hair a swirling mass that clung to the bark. She looked up at me, eyes hollow, mouth stretched wide. A scream erupted from her that sounded both near and far, slicing through the air. My ears rang, my nose started bleeding. I tasted iron and felt my knees buckle. I realized I was seconds from passing out. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I staggered away from the opening. Maya lunged, grabbing for me, nails raking across my arm. I screamed in pain. I jerked away, pulling with everything I had. Flesh tore, but I broke free. She whipped her head around, mouth twisting into a furious scowl. One of her eyes was bloodshot to the point of being completely red. I half ran, half crawled toward the camp, adrenaline fueling me beyond the pain. Behind me, I heard Maya's footsteps, or maybe something else's. My only thought was to find a weapon. The hatchet she'd dropped earlier. It was near the fire pit. I snatched it up, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe I was about to fight my friend, or what used to be my friend. Maya stumbled into the clearing, that grin returning in full force. At the same moment, the tree line behind her seemed to stir. A shape taller than any human drifted among the shadows, like black mist outlined in moonlight. I heard the faint sound of weeping. Then a voice that was not a voice, but more like a pressure in my skull, whispered, "I want your soul." It was too much. My mind felt close to snapping. I gripped the hatchet, my hands shaking, tears blurring my vision. Maya charged with unnerving speed. I swung clumsily. The blade bit into her shoulder. She let out a hiss, but still kept coming. I wrenched the hatchet free. Before she could grab me, I sidestepped and brought it down on her leg. She fell, howling a strangled, inhuman cry. Blood stained the ground, though she continued clawing at me. Somehow, I managed to kick her off and dash away, my heart thundering in my ears. I realized the tree, the banshee, whatever it was, seemed to feed on fear, on souls that lingered near. If I was going to survive, I had to do something about it. The old pamphlet had implied that the mother's spirit was tied to the oak. Maybe, if I destroyed it, I could weaken her hold. But the oak was massive and ancient. I had no way to burn it properly in this twisted reality. Still, I had to try something. I gathered every piece of dry wood I could find, piling it around the trunk, ignoring the stench of the mass grave. I poured what was left of my camp fuel, which I found half spilled near my tent. I prayed it would be enough. I flicked my lighter open. The flame sputtered as if resisting the air around it. I coaxed it onto a scrap of cloth, which finally took light. I tossed the burning cloth at the fuel-soaked wood. The pile flared up quickly, licking at the bark. As the fire crawled higher, the trunk's surface seemed to writhe. A low moan emanated from the hollow, blending with a furious shriek that rattled every bone in my body. Maya, or the thing inside her, staggered out of the darkness, shrieking in unison with the tree. She lunged at me with her last strength. My head snapped back as she crashed into me, sending us both to the ground. My back collided with a rock, and I felt a horrifying burst of pain. My vision blurred with tears. Still, I clung to the hatchet. She was above me, hands around my throat, the stench of rotting leaves on her breath. Summoning everything I had left, I managed to wedge the hatchet handle beneath her chin and push her back an inch. Then, fueled by desperation, I kicked up with my knee. She let out a choking groan. I took that moment to swing the hatchet sideways, striking her across the neck. Blood sprayed across my chest. She collapsed, body spasming. In her dying breath, I heard a soft whisper, "Moira wants you." Then her eyes rolled up, and she was still. I could barely process what I'd just done. Maya, my friend, was dead, and I was the one who did it. But she hadn't truly been Maya for some time. I looked at the oak, now fully engulfed in flames. The fire illuminated a horrifying sight. The ground around the base seemed to bubble, as if releasing trapped souls. I saw faces that might have been illusions or real spirits screaming in the rising smoke. The stench was unbearable. Then, from within the hollow, the banshee emerged. She was tall, gaunt, her skin resembling twisted bark, eyes empty but for a faint milky glow. Her mouth opened in a silent wail. I say silent because no sound reached my ears, yet my mind reeled from a piercing shriek. I felt warm blood trickle from my nose. My head felt like it was about to burst. She glided closer, steps not quite touching the ground. I clutched the hatchet, but my arms felt leaden. My entire body trembled. The banshee glared down at me as if assessing how best to end me. Then I heard a sound that nearly stopped my heart. Ivy's whine. But Ivy was dead. My gaze darted sideways. There, on the ground, lay my beloved dog. Her body remained limp, eyes open and lifeless. Yet the sound repeated. It was a trick, a cruel imitation to erode my resolve. The banshee leaned forward, her breath swirling around me in a cold mist. Her face was so close I could smell decay. My vision doubled. The world around me seemed to slow. I heard her voice in my head. "You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself." I felt something, her finger, touch my chest. A frigid numbness spread through my body, slowing my heart. With the last shred of willpower, I twisted my torso and slammed the hatchet blade into her throat, the same way I'd seen horror movie protagonists do as a last resort. The blade sank deeper than I expected, splitting that bark-like skin. A gush of freezing cold fluid, blackish, reeking of sulfur, spattered across my face. The banshee's mouth formed a twisted O in shock or agony. The silent shriek tore through my skull again, but this time it faded into a choking gurgle. The flames around us roared higher. The banshee twitched, her form collapsing into the flickering light. She dissipated, turning to smoky wisps that joined the rest of the rising ash. I sank to my knees, chest heaving, tears and black fluid mixing on my cheeks. My entire body felt like it would give out. Something in the tree's structure cracked. A massive branch toppled, throwing sparks everywhere. In that moment, I realized the danger. I was about to be trapped in a burning forest. Mustering the last of my strength, I hobbled away from the inferno. My ankle throbbed with each step. I just kept going until I found the faint outline of a trail. I have no idea how long I stumbled through the trees. The sky overhead was tinted orange from the flames behind me, and the air grew thick with smoke. My sense of time was still skewed. Maybe an hour passed, or maybe only a few minutes. Eventually, I spotted a dirt road. With the lights dancing in my vision, I half fell onto it. A passing truck found me at dawn, an older couple who were out checking deer feeders. They took one look at my bloody clothes and half-conscious form and rushed me to a nearby hospital. In the days that followed, I tried to explain what happened, but my story sounded insane even to my own ears. Maya's body was never found. The campsite was destroyed by fire. The oak burned to a husk. The officials blamed it on an uncontrolled campfire that spread. They said the remains of animals found at the scene might have been from poachers' dumping grounds, or possibly old farmland. They didn't seem interested in investigating further. For weeks, I mourned Ivy. I had nightmares about the moment when Maya, no, the thing wearing Maya, killed her. I had nightmares about the pit of bones, about the twisted face in the bark. Doctors prescribed me sedatives, told me that survivors of traumatic events often recall details in strange ways. I tried to let them believe it was just trauma, that I was confabulating or hallucinating under stress. Deep down, I knew better. When I finally got back on my feet, I retrieved my camera from where the rangers said they found it near the Jeep. The memory card was surprisingly intact. Most of the photos were black squares, corrupted. But there was one image at the very end of the series. It showed me, asleep in my tent, with Maya lying beside me, her eyes wide open, staring at the camera lens. The angle was from above, as if someone had taken the picture from the tent ceiling, but we were alone out there, and I certainly never gave my camera to Maya to take such a photo. Worse still, I could see Ivy's tail in the corner of the shot, just a blurry shape. That detail always makes me cry a little. Though I tried to forget, sometimes I feel the presence of that cursed place. On quiet nights in the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, I hear the faint whine of Ivy. Sometimes a child's sob, sometimes the moaning wind through dead branches. I know the entity was wounded. I buried that hatchet in her throat. But I can't shake the sense that she's not entirely gone, that the soil in those remote Oklahoma woods may yet hold some flicker of her malicious spirit. Even now, I wake up to find my bedroom window open, or my camera on the floor with new, unexplained images. The last time I saw a silhouette that looked just like Maya's shape, peering around a corner in a photo I didn't remember taking. I wiped my memory card, sealed my camera away in a closet. But part of me suspects you can't erase a presence like that. I'm sharing this story now because I think people should know that there are places in this world, old places, drenched in sorrow, where malevolent forces wait. If you happen to camp or hike in the Ouachita National Forest, especially near a burnt husk of a large oak, listen carefully at night. If you hear a faint scream, if your dog growls at the wind, if your watch stops or your phone refuses to charge, turn around and leave. Because some spirits can't be reasoned with, can't be exorcised by logic or faith. And if you let yourself stray too close, you might just find you can't escape at all. That's what happened to me. This is as real and honest as I can make it. My name is Rachel Morris, and every day I live with the guilt that I couldn't save my dog, that I had to kill my friend, and that I nearly became a vessel for something beyond my understanding. Whether I crippled that entity or only enraged it, I can't say. I only know that I'm still alive, though sometimes I wonder if that's truly a blessing, or just another curse bound to that screaming tree. 01. My name is Mark Redding. I'm 33 years old. This happened in August of 2023 when my best friend Josh and I decided to go camping in Black Mesa State Park and Nature Preserve in Cimarron County, Oklahoma. I keep telling myself that if I don't write it down now, I'll lose track of what really happened, or what I think really happened. I'm not a soldier or anything like that. I'm just a freelance writer, mostly online articles about true crime and paranormal legends. I've always been fascinated by weird phenomena, the kind of stories that make you double-check your locks at night. But nothing in my research prepared me for what I encountered in that isolated corner of Oklahoma. Josh Alvarez, who's 31, is more grounded than I am. A nature photographer, easygoing, but also the type who double-checks every detail on a map. We've known each other since college. I'd recently gone through a bad breakup and was feeling desperate for some time away from city life, so Josh suggested we do a 5-day backpacking trip in one of the most remote regions of the state. I jumped at the idea, telling him it would give me a chance to find inspiration for my blog. In truth, I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle solitude and see something extraordinary. I brought my German Shepherd, Axel, a 7-year-old rescue dog who has been my steadfast companion since I adopted him. Axel is usually confident on the trail. He's well-trained, calm in all sorts of conditions. Before this trip, I'd never seen him show signs of real fear. We drove up to the tiny town of Kenton, near the New Mexico border, right at the edge of the Black Mesa region. From the start, the place felt different. It has a stark beauty, with flat-topped mesas and desert scrub. The nearest significant grocery store was nearly 2 hours away. Cell phone coverage was spotty, which I expected, but that was partly the appeal. We wanted to escape the clamor of modern life. We parked Josh's old SUV at a dusty trailhead near the park boundary. Our plan was to trek a loop that would take us well into the preserve, camp 4 nights, then return. The first day went smoothly enough. We started under a blistering sun. I remember shielding my eyes as I took in the wide open vistas. Dried creek beds snaking across arid plains, the layered rock of the mesa rising in the distance. Josh carried his camera bag, snapping pictures of the desert flora and occasional lizards. Axel trotted ahead, tongue lolling, tail wagging. We made good time that day, setting up camp by a shallow, stagnant creek. Nightfall brought a star-studded sky like nothing I'd seen in years. But even on that first night, we noticed small oddities. The fire was finicky. We collected plenty of dry wood, yet the flames kept shrinking into embers, almost as if starved by an unseen force. When we finally got it going, the flames had hints of blue and green, like copper was burning inside, but we hadn't added anything unusual to the fire. Josh blamed the local minerals. We laughed it off, finished our freeze-dried dinners, and turned in early. Axel barked in the direction of the dark a couple of times, but there was nothing out there when we shone our flashlights. I slept fitfully, plagued by half-lucid dreams of walking across the mesa in broad daylight, except the sun in the sky was black. Every time I looked down in the dream, my shadow was gone, or maybe it was crawling away. When I woke up in the morning, I found my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside. That alone wasn't too weird. I could have done it myself while half asleep. But my boots were outside the tent, carefully placed in a neat line with Josh's. I never do that. I always keep them inside the tent to avoid scorpions and other critters, but I shrugged it off. Still, something about that gave me chills. Josh teased me. Sleepwalking, Mark? Or maybe Axel's got an organizational streak now. We joked, but both of us felt uneasy. Axel refused to eat breakfast and kept whimpering at the tree line. That day, the second day of our trek, we were supposed to follow a faintly marked trail that looped around a small canyon and then wind up on top of the mesa, where we planned to camp. Early on, our GPS started glitching. It showed our position jumping around as if we were teleporting. Josh cursed under his breath, slapping the device. I tried my phone but had zero reception, no surprise there. We resorted to the paper map. But the map was so old and the terrain so worn that half the landmarks didn't match up. We started getting turned around amid the rocky gullies. Around midday, the sun was punishing. We found shade under a rock overhang, giving Axel water. That's when we first encountered Emily Shore. She approached from the east, carrying a single large backpack. She was about 29, average height, lean, with sunburnt cheeks and dark hair pulled back in a braid. She was wearing hiking boots that had definitely seen better days. She greeted us cautiously, but we were so relieved to see another person that we were all smiles. She told us her name, said she'd been out here for almost a week, that her car battery had died near a less-traveled dirt road. She claimed she was heading back to the nearest town but got lost when her phone died. Josh offered that she'd tag along with us for safety. From the moment we met Emily, though, I sensed something was off. She carried herself too calmly for someone who claimed she was stranded. Her eyes had a sharp, appraising look, as though she were studying us, but after we shared water and snacks, she warmed up, cracked a few jokes about her fantastic luck, and started telling us about the wildlife she'd seen. In hindsight, I wish I'd trusted my gut right then, but maybe none of what happened next would have changed. We continued onward together. Axel eventually seemed okay with Emily. He sniffed her legs and accepted a quick pat on the head, though he was still in an anxious mood. A few miles later, we reached a broad, rocky plateau. The view was breathtaking. Rolling scrubland with the Mesa rising in the distance. Sheer walls of basalt in some spots. We could even see faint shapes of some wild pronghorns in the distance. The plan was to press on for another couple of miles, then make camp in a small valley that had decent tree cover. But as we left the plateau, the environment around us grew eerily still. No wind, no bird calls. Even the crickets seemed absent. The heat was oppressive, and I had the sudden thought that we were stepping into a place where we didn't belong. When we found the campsite, it was a grassy dip near a dry creek bed, ringed by a few junipers. We set up our tents in a rough triangle with a fire pit in the middle. Axel sat close to me, panting. Emily offered to scout for extra firewood before dark. Josh and I both insisted on helping, but she said, "Don't worry about it. I'm used to hiking around alone. I won't go far." She took a small hatchet and a flashlight, then slipped off into the brush. The sun was sinking, so I told her not to wander too long. An hour passed, then 2. The sun had set. Twilight was quickly vanishing. Josh and I tried calling her name, no answer. Axel grew increasingly agitated, pacing in circles around the camp. We argued about whether to go look for her in the dark or wait. Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight and told Josh I'd do a quick perimeter search. I moved slowly through the undergrowth, calling her name. The air was dead still, and the quiet was suffocating. Then I heard footsteps behind me, light and quick. I spun around, shining my flashlight. Emily was standing maybe 15 feet away, partially hidden behind a rock. She was staring at me, not responding. The beam fell across her face, and I noticed her expression was neutral, almost slack, except for a slight curl of her lips like she was trying to smile but had forgotten how. "Emily?" I said, stepping closer. "We were worried about you." Without a word, she walked up to me, handed me a neat stack of branches, and said softly, "I got firewood." Her tone was flat. A weird smell clung to her, coppery and faintly sweet like old blood. I should have confronted her right then, but something in her eyes made my spine crawl. I got the sense that if I pushed her for answers at that moment, something dangerous might happen. We returned to camp, and Josh greeted her with an exasperated laugh. "We thought you fell off the face of the earth," he said. Emily just shrugged. She didn't apologize, didn't explain. She dropped the branches near the fire pit and went to her tent. Josh shot me a questioning look, but I just shook my head. We decided to leave her alone for the evening. That night, we tried lighting the fire again. No luck. The wood Emily brought sparked but refused to catch. Eventually, we had to dig into our pack stashes for a fire-starting kit. When the flames finally did come to life, they danced in odd colors again, blue and green flickers, as if something toxic was burning. The hair on my arms rose. Josh stared at the flames like they were mocking him. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured. He tapped at his camera, but the digital screen had a glitchy flicker. That annoyed him more. "Great, I hope the memory card is still good." We ate in silence. Protein bars and water, mostly. Emily emerged from her tent to stand by the fire. She was quiet, staring into the embers. Axel growled softly and backed away, When I tried to approach Emily, she just smiled in this vague, uncertain way like she was half forgetting how. "Emily," I said, "you all right?" She blinked, as though not understanding the question. "I'm tired," she said after a moment, and returned to her tent. It was a restless night. At one point, I heard footsteps around our tents, slow and shuffling. I thought it was Axel, but I reached out and felt him pressed against my leg, trembling. I listened harder. Someone was circling us, breathing in a rasping pattern. Then it stopped. Josh's voice floated through the dark. "Hey, is that you, Mark?" Before I could answer, I heard a soft laugh. It didn't sound like either of us. It was almost mechanical. Then everything went silent. I wanted to climb out of my tent, but fear pinned me. I lay there until exhaustion overpowered my nerves. We woke to find our packs had been moved. Each pack stood upright about 20 feet away, perched on rocks. The zippers were open and some of the contents spilled out. Food wrappers, a battery pack, even one of Josh's spare camera lenses. Axel was whining at the edge of a camp, hackles raised. Josh let out a frustrated groan and ran over to check for damage. Our water canisters were partially drained. Worst of all, some of our freeze-dried meals looked like they'd been gnawed on, though there were no bite marks, just tears in the packaging. The food inside was rotting, like months-old garbage, soft and rancid. We'd only bought it the day before, so that made no sense. Emily emerged from her tent, hair tangled, face pale. She studied the rummaged packs and asked, "Did we have visitors last night?" She sounded almost amused. Josh looked at her sharply. "You didn't hear anything?" She shrugged. "I was sleeping." I said, "Somebody or something was definitely out there, and it took our stuff, or tried to." While we reorganized our gear, we found weird footprints in the dusty soil around the tents. They resembled human footprints, but narrow at the heel, elongated toes. Too long to be normal. No sign of claws. Just a bizarre shape, like a barefoot runner with stretched toes. None of us mentioned it, but I saw that Josh's face had gone pale. Emily's face was blank. After that, we decided to push on early, maybe cut the trip a bit shorter. None of us wanted to linger. There was still a faint trail leading northwest, up toward the higher part of the mesa, so we followed it. Axel kept glancing over his shoulder, ears flat. Josh tried to lighten the mood by telling jokes, but no one laughed. We walked for hours. The heat was punishing. By mid-afternoon, we were trudging across the top of the mesa, which was more expansive than I'd imagined. Sparse vegetation, rocky outcrops, and an endless horizon. The wind picked up, hot and dry. It stung my eyes. Axel kept pulling on the leash, as if trying to steer me in another direction. I had to coax him forward. Eventually, we spotted a crooked wooden sign near a cluster of boulders, likely put there by park rangers at some point. The writing was too faded to read, but behind it was a shallow cave-like overhang in the rock. It seemed a good place to camp for the night, sheltered from the wind. None of us were enthusiastic about more open camping after the previous night's events. As we set up camp, I noticed something carved into the rock face. Grendel. The letters were jagged, almost scratched in. I squinted at it, trying to recall if there was some local legend about a Grendel in these parts. The only Grendel I knew of was from Beowulf, the monster. I forced a laugh, pointing it out to Josh, but he looked uneasy. Emily just stared at it like she recognized the name. "Probably some bored teenager with a pocket knife," I said, though it didn't convince me. Oh, night fell early, or so it felt. One moment the sun was high, the next it was sliding behind the horizon. Time seemed to skip a beat. Josh muttered that he'd left something back at the plateau, but he couldn't remember exactly what. His watch showed it was almost 9 at night, but my phone said it was only 6. Emily's watch was stuck at 2:30. A creeping sense of confusion took hold, and we argued about what time it actually was. Eventually, we gave up, pitched the tents near the overhang, and tried to eat dinner. Axel barely touched his water. He kept looking toward the open desert as if expecting something. After an hour or so of tense silence, we heard the whistling. It was soft, drifting through the still air. A random melody with no pattern, high-pitched. My skin prickled. Emily raised her head, eyes bright. She said, "I'll go look," and started walking off. Josh and I exchanged a glance. "No," I began, but she was already moving, flashlight in hand. I told Josh, "I'm going after her this time." He nodded. "I'll stay with Axel, keep watch on the camp." I followed Emily at a brisk pace. She kept the flashlight aimed ahead, walking with unnerving purpose. The whistling was faint, but always in front of us. I felt like we trekked half a mile across the rocky ground until I reached out to grab her shoulder. She stopped, turned to face me with that same blank smile. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She lowered the flashlight. "I heard someone," she said, her voice strangely hollow. "Didn't you?" "It's not safe to wander alone," I said. "We should go back." She stared at me too long, not blinking. Then she nodded once. "All right." We turned around, and the whistling stopped. On the way back, we couldn't find our own footprints. The terrain looked different. Finally, I spotted the overhang in the distance and felt a rush of relief. When we got to camp, Josh looked frantic. "Emily, how long were you gone?" he asked, his eyes flicking between us. "It's been hours." "No," I said, "maybe 20 minutes, half an hour tops." He shook his head. "You left at dusk, man. It's midnight now. I've been calling your names nonstop." I tried to argue with him, but checking my phone only added to my confusion. It read 1:14 a.m. Emily's watch still said 2:30. Josh's watch read 9:47 p.m. Axel growled at Emily again, and I noticed she reeked of that coppery smell. It made my stomach churn. We sat down by the remains of a feeble fire, not sure what else to do, and that's when Emily placed a hand on Josh's shoulder in an oddly intimate gesture. He flinched away. "I think we should leave first thing in the morning," Josh said. "Scrap the rest of this trip." Emily's lips curved upward, but her eyes remained cold. "Sure," she replied, "but it won't help." "What?" I asked, though I almost didn't want to hear the answer. She shrugged. "You can try." That night, I woke to a strange wet sound. Lying in my tent, I realized I was alone. Axel wasn't beside me. I heard rustling outside. My first panicked thought was that he'd run off. Then I heard a muffled scream, abruptly cut short. I grabbed my headlamp and crawled out, heart pounding. Josh's tent was dark and silent. Emily was nowhere in sight. The moonlit sky made everything look colorless. I moved toward the sound of thrashing, nearly tripping over something on the ground. It was Axel's leash, torn apart. The collar was sticky with blood. Panic exploded in my chest. I called his name, scanning the darkness with my headlamp, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Then I saw a silhouette near a boulder, about 10 yards away. My beam caught Emily. She was crouched low, shoulders hunched, doing something on the ground. It took me a moment to realize she was holding a limp shape in her arms. "Josh." She looked up at me, eyes reflecting light like an animal's. Blood coated her hands, and Josh's neck gaped open. He wasn't moving. I stifled a scream. Emily stood, letting Josh's body slump to the dirt. Blood dripped from her fingers. She stared at me with an expression I can only describe as curious, like she was testing my reaction. "Why did you do?" I started, my voice cracking. She took a step toward me. My flashlight caught her face. Her skin was pale, her pupils massively dilated, and there was a small cut on her cheek that looked like it wasn't bleeding at all. "He asked for it," she said softly, as though it were the most reasonable explanation in the world. I backed away in horror. "Where's Axel?" She tilted her head and pointed into the night. "You can still save him," she said. Then she broke into a weird half-laugh that ended in a rasp. I turned and ran, ignoring the dryness in my throat, ignoring the guilt that I was leaving Josh's body behind. I called Axel's name, stumbling across the uneven ground. My headlamp swayed, revealing nothing but scraggly bushes and rocks. The night felt endless. Then I heard whimpering. My heart surged as I rushed over to find Axel lying on his side, panting heavily. He had a deep slash in his flank, as if inflicted by a blade or jagged rock, but he was alive. I pressed my hand to the wound, tears burning my eyes. I fumbled for the med kit in my pocket, but realized I'd left the full supply kit back at the campsite. My mind reeled between shock, fear, and heartbreak for Josh. Suddenly, a voice behind me whispered, "Mark!" I spun. Emily stood there just a few feet away. Her lips were parted in a slight smile, face still spattered with blood. She moved gracefully, arms loose at her sides. I rose to face her, my head swimming. She could kill me in an instant, but she just watched as I backed away, edging around Axel protectively. "Stay back," I hissed. She tilted her head again as if not quite understanding. "You're not going to make it out of here alone," she said. Anger flared, momentarily eclipsing my fear. "You killed Josh!" She lowered her gaze to the ground. Then, in a voice frighteningly close to Josh's own, she said, "I'm fine. I'm right here." That single sentence cut through my soul. I lurched forward, picking up a heavy rock. Her eyes flashed, and she lunged in a disturbingly fast motion, grabbing my wrist. Her grip was icy cold. We struggled. She was stronger than she looked. I managed to slam the rock against her shoulder. She let out a grunt, staggering back. The blow should have dislocated or broken something, but she barely seemed affected. Still, it gave me enough room to scoop Axel into my arms and dart away. I didn't look back. I just ran into the darkness, heart hammering as if it might burst. I found myself stumbling along the edge of the mesa. The terrain sloped downward in precarious switchbacks. By some insane stroke of fortune, I spotted the faint beam of a flashlight shining among the rocks. At first, I panicked, thinking it was Emily. But as I drew closer, I realized it was the remains of our camp, a single lantern we'd left flicked on next to Josh's tent. But the tent was empty. Josh's body was gone. The fire pit was cold ash. Our supplies, water canisters, leftover food, were scattered. I had to lay Axel down gently, rummaging for anything I could use to bandage his wound. My hands shook as I worked, using gauze from the medkit and duct tape to hold it in place. Axel whimpered but let me do what I had to do. That was when I realized something else was missing. The day. The sky had a faint glow, as if dawn was about to break. I must have run around in the darkness for hours, but it felt like minutes. My phone read 3:33 a.m. My watch read 12:20. I had no idea how that made sense with the approaching light. I forced myself not to think about it. I had to get out. That was my only objective. I debated trying to find the trail, but with the weird time phenomena, the twisting paths, the whistling that seemed to come from nowhere, I knew I might wander in circles. So I decided I'd head back in the general direction of the park entrance, or at least to some main road. It was a gamble, but staying put felt like suicide. I found a half-full water container and slung a small pack over my shoulder. Then I lifted Axel again. He was around 80 pounds, but adrenaline gave me the strength. As I trudged across the rocky ground, I kept looking back, expecting to see Emily following me. Each time, I saw only empty rock. The rising light in the sky felt wrong, pale and sickly, more silver than orange. Axel was drifting in and out of consciousness, each labored breath reminding me I had to keep going. Eventually, I crested a ridge and saw something that made me freeze. Josh. He was standing at the bottom of the slope, facing me, barefoot on the jagged rocks, wearing what looked like his original clothing but in tatters. His posture was odd, arms hanging limp at his sides, chin tilted down. There was no blood on his neck, no sign of a wound. My rational mind screamed that it couldn't be him. Josh was gone. I'd seen his body, but there he was, or something that looked like him, waiting. I stared down at him and he called out in a hoarse voice, "Mark, you left me." He sounded plaintive, as if hurt, but also strangely monotone. Terror warred with guilt inside me. I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "No, you were dead." He blinked slowly, too slowly, then repeated, "You left me." He started walking up the slope. It was a stumbling gait, like a puppet learning to walk. I backed away, adjusting my grip on Axel. My dog growled feebly. The figure that looked like Josh advanced until he stood just a few yards away. I could see the unnatural shine in his eyes. My stomach twisted. I recalled how Emily had spoken in Josh's voice. I realized, with a surge of nausea, that this was another trick, another masquerade. Part of me wanted to drop Axel and run, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "Who are you?" I demanded. He just stared. Then he cocked his head, letting a too long silence stretch between us. "We never should have come here," he said, voice cracking. "We belong here now." I gathered every ounce of courage I had. "Stay back." He took another slow step, lips curling into a lopsided grin. Then his eyes flicked to Axel, and that grin became a hunger. My heart thundered. I had no weapon except the small rock I'd carried. Summoning a desperate burst of strength, I hurled the rock. It caught him right across the jaw, his head snapped to the side. I expected him to drop, but he didn't. Instead, he turned back, jaw slack, unhinged almost. Then he stepped forward again. I ran. Axel whimpered in my arms. I stumbled down the slope, nearly falling multiple times. I didn't dare look back. I just heard those footsteps, heavier now, following. The slope ended in a small ravine with a scattered herd of juniper trees. I wove through them, cursing every root that snagged my boots. Finally, I ducked behind a large cluster of boulders, trying to steady my breathing. No sign of pursuit. My ears rang with adrenaline, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. Axel's breathing was shallow. I gave him a sip of water, though he barely swallowed. My mind raced with half-formed plans. I had to get him to safety, find a ranger station or a road, anything. I thought I remembered that the main access road was east of our original trailhead, so I turned in that direction. I kept moving, stumbling from exhaustion, half carrying, half dragging Axel. At some point, the sun rose properly, or maybe it was midday or late afternoon. Time had no meaning. I just remember the white-hot glare baking my shoulders, the dryness in my throat. The land seemed empty, void of wildlife. No birds, no rabbits, no insects. Even the wind seemed to vanish. My GPS was worthless, blinking random numbers. My phone battery was draining faster than normal, even though I barely used it. Every so often, I'd check the phone's clock. It jumped from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to 11 a.m. again. I started to doubt my own senses. I also caught glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision, figures flitting between the rocks, gone when I looked directly. Often, I heard faint whistling. Twice, I saw a silhouette on a distant ridge, unmoving. My skin crawled with the certainty that it was watching me. Axel's wound began to bleed anew around what my phone insisted was 2 p.m. I used more gauze, but I was running out. My dog's eyes were glassy. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. Then I saw something else. Ahead, perched on the cracked earth, was a wooden sign. As I approached, I realized it was the same sign we'd seen near the cave, the one with the word Grendel carved into the rock behind it. I cursed in disbelief. We'd walked in a huge circle apparently, but that was impossible. I'd gone straight east for hours. Yet there it was, the same overhang in the distance. Fury and frustration welled up. I trudged forward, determined to at least find some shade for Axel. Reaching the overhang, I saw what was left of our tents and supplies. Josh's tent had collapsed into a heap. My own tent was shredded, the poles snapped. Emily's was gone entirely. My head spun. I felt like I was losing my mind. I lay Axel under the overhang, shielding him from the sun. I checked his bandages and tried to give him water. His tail thumped once, weakly. My heart broke at the possibility I might lose him. I kept telling him, "Hang on, boy, hang on." My throat was so dry I could barely speak. That was when I noticed the carvings on the rock wall. In addition to Grendel, there were other marks, symbols, handprints, and scratchings that resembled half-formed faces. Some had been etched recently, others had flaked with age. It was a tapestry of madness. I stepped closer, noticing that one of the newer scratches looked like a dog's paw print, elongated in a disturbing way. I heard a voice behind me, my own voice. It said, "Mark." I spun around to see Emily. She stood a few yards away, eyes glinting in the half-light. Despite the searing day, she wore her jacket zipped up to the collar as if it were freezing. Then I realized it wasn't Emily's face exactly, not anymore. The shape of her features had changed, lengthened subtly. Her eyes were different, a faint gold color. She stared at me intently. I had no words for her. Fear clutched my throat. My mind screamed, "That's not Emily, that's whatever killed her, or wore her skin." She slowly approached. I braced myself, no weapon in hand except desperation. "Give him to me," she said, her voice soft. She nodded toward Axel. My stomach lurched. "Don't you touch him," I growled. She took another step, then paused. She seemed to savor the air, as if tasting my fear. "You already know I can end his suffering," she said. "He can't keep going like this." I raised my fists, voice trembling. "Stay the hell away." She flicked her gaze to the carvings on the wall and gave a slow, eerie smile. "You thought you were searching for a story, something to make you famous. You found it, Mark. Look around. This is what you wanted, right? Something extraordinary?" My heart hammered. I never wanted this. She, or it, didn't reply. Instead, she lunged, her speed impossibly fast. I scrambled backward, shouting, "No!" She seized my arm with shocking force. Her fingers felt cold as death. She twisted, and I felt the tendons in my arm scream in pain. The world spun. I crashed onto my back with a gasp. She stood over me, eyes wild, that twisted grin etched into her face. Then she leaned down to whisper, "You're mine now." And her breath stank of decaying flesh. I flailed, trying to free my left arm. My hand scrabbled across the ground, landing on a jagged piece of rock. Adrenaline roared through me as I smashed it upward into her side. The stone edge punched through her jacket. She let out a noise halfway between a shriek and a laugh. She staggered. For a split second, her face seemed to flicker, as though I was seeing something else behind it. Thin, grayish features, empty eye sockets. Then she collapsed onto her knees. I scrambled up and swung the rock again, striking her shoulder, then again against her neck. She didn't bleed like a normal person. Thick black clumps oozed from the wound, more tar than blood. She made a strangled sound, struggling to rise. Summoning every ounce of will, I slammed the rock down once more, connecting with her collarbone. It cracked. She let out a final wheezing hiss. Then her face seemed to fracture, as if it were made of dried clay. Pieces fell away, revealing a hideous, half-formed visage beneath. I flinched back in revulsion as her body collapsed, crumbling into a pile of ash and black sludge. I stumbled away, heart pounding like a jackhammer, bile rising in my throat. I fought the urge to vomit. My mind refused to accept what I'd just seen. Yet there it was, an unrecognizable mass dissolving into the dirt. Axel let out a weak bark, snapping me back to reality. I rushed to him. He was alive, but barely. I don't know how long I sat there, cradling Axel, my eyes locked on the spot where Emily, or that thing, had died. The sun overhead seemed stuck at midday. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice behind me. "Mark, we gotta move." I twisted around and my heart nearly stopped. It was Josh. He stood there, upright, wearing the same outfit, though bloodstains marred his shirt. His face was clear of injury, but something was off about his smile. Too wide, like it was borrowed. He didn't approach me, just waited, arms slack at his sides. I shook my head violently. "No, you're dead. I saw you." He laughed. His laugh was an exact copy of Josh's from old times, that bright, slightly goofy laugh. "I'm right here, man. Come on, we can still hike out." I struggled to form words. "Stay away from me." He took a step forward, ignoring my warning. "Don't you remember? We never made it up here. We talked about it, but we left early. You're just tired. Let's go home." A black wave of despair swept over me. I realized I was facing the same abomination as Emily, just wearing Josh's shape. I could see hints of the same golden sheen in his eyes. I recalled how Emily had used Josh's voice. My friend was truly gone. I lifted the bloody rock in warning. "Don't come closer." It tilted its head. In that moment, I was sure it was about to attack, but then a strange series of twitches passed over its face, almost like it was trying to recollect how a human might respond. Abruptly, it turned and walked away, disappearing behind the overhang. I let out a long breath, shoulders trembling. I knew I couldn't stay. I gathered what little strength I had and gently lifted Axel again, ignoring the searing pain in my arms and back. My dog whimpered, but rested his head against my chest, trusting me. I gave him the last of our water. My only goal was to reach any sign of civilization. I staggered away from the overhang, the cursed carvings, the scattered debris. The desert stretched out, mocking me with its emptiness. I don't know how long I stumbled. Time once again lost all shape. The sun flickered overhead, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, as if clouds were racing across it. I remember the ground felt spongy underfoot, my vision blurring. I clung to consciousness for Axel's sake. Heat pulsed in waves, my lips were cracked, my skin burned. At some point, I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the hot earth. Axel was gone from my arms. Terror jolted me awake. I scrambled up, head spinning, mouth so dry my tongue felt like sandpaper. I called Axel's name until my voice cracked. Panic tore at my chest. Then I saw him lying a few yards away in the shade of a huge boulder. Someone had dragged him there, someone who left footprints that looked almost human but elongated. I rushed to him. He was unconscious but breathing. My bandages on his wound were half unwrapped, and fresh gauze was placed there, as though someone had tried to treat him. My mind reeled. Was it that thing? Was it trying to help me, or just prolong our suffering? At that moment, I heard an engine noise, faint but unmistakable. A surge of hope overcame me. Clutching Axel's collar, I stumbled around the boulder and saw, in the far distance, a pair of headlights. It was almost night again, or maybe dawn. The darkness was creeping over the horizon. I raised my arms, screaming for help. The headlights grew closer, and eventually I could make out a dusty pickup truck. 2 park rangers found me. To this day, I don't know how. They were out searching for a missing hiker, or so they said, someone who'd vanished weeks ago. I collapsed into their arms, babbling about Josh, about Emily, about the thing that wore their faces. They radioed for medical support. Axel was rushed into the truck. I passed out soon after. When I came to, I was in what looked like a small clinic, bright fluorescent lights glaring. The nurse standing over me asked my name. I told her, Mark Redding. She gave me a curious, sympathetic look. Then she said, "The ranger report said your name was Josh." I froze. My whole body went cold. I started to protest. "No, that's my friend's name. He was killed. She pressed a reassuring hand to my shoulder. "Try to stay calm, okay?" She motioned to the ID band on my wrist. It read, Joshua Alvarez. I tried to rip it off. My heart pounded. "That's not my name," I insisted, voice choked with panic. She exchanged a glance with a nearby doctor, and I saw concern in both their eyes. The doctor approached with a sedative. I felt a pinch in my arm and the world blurred again. That was weeks ago, or so I've been told. I'm still in some small hospital near Cimarron County. They say I was severely dehydrated, delirious. I overheard them talking about an infection in my arm, apparently from a nasty wound that matches the story I told about a fight. No one believes me about what happened up there. They found a campsite with torn tents and scattered belongings, sure, but no sign of other bodies. No sign of my friend Josh or Emily. Axel is alive. That much is real. He's here in the same facility, recovering from surgery for the slash in his side. He growls at some of the staff. The nurse told me with a smile that Josh's dog is pretty protective, and I haven't bothered to correct her. I'm just glad he's alive. Now, I sit in bed, writing this down while it's fresh, though each time I read what I wrote, the handwriting looks different from the day before. Or I catch phrases I don't remember typing, like, "We are yours now," scribbled in the margins. My phone was returned to me, but the photos are jumbled. Landscape shots from the trip appear out of order, timestamps all messed up, some images overlapping. In one, I see the silhouette of a tall, thin figure standing on a ridge. It wasn't any of us. I keep dreaming that I'm back on that mesa. I see Emily's face cracking, flaking into ash, hear the whistling in the darkness, and sometimes I see Josh standing on a distant rock, eyes reflecting golden, calling my name in a voice that's no longer quite human. I wake up screaming. The doctors say I can leave once my dehydration is fully resolved and they're sure I'm stable, but I notice them exchanging worried looks. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in front of the bathroom mirror and I think my reflection lags behind me, or it looks at me with an expression I'm not making. The stench of copper follows me, faint but persistent. I'm terrified that part of that thing followed me back. I'm terrified that when I walk out of here it'll be waiting. I'm terrified that maybe I didn't truly escape, that the strange flickering sun and the warped hours are just continuing in another form. Maybe I never left. Maybe I never will. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that something out in Black Mesa changed me. I came out alive, but I'm not sure I came out whole. And if you ever think about going up there, to that lonely corner of Oklahoma, please heed my warning. Don't go looking for what you're not prepared to find, because it might already be looking for you, oh one. My name is Daniel Reed, and I'm 38 years old. This happened in May of 2022. I've spent the last year trying to convince myself it wasn't real. I keep telling myself it was just a feverish nightmare brought on by stress and dehydration. But no matter what I say, I can't deny the evidence. The scars on my arms, the singe marks on my boots, and the things I see in every mirror, especially at night. I'll tell you everything, and you can decide for yourself if you believe me. I'm a freelance wildlife photographer. I'm no ex-soldier or survival expert, just a guy who grew up in Oklahoma City and never really fit the mold of the son my father wanted. After a messy divorce last year, I spent a lot of nights on the couch with a beer, feeling sorry for myself, convincing myself I still had a purpose. When my photography gigs started to pick up again, I decided to do something big, a personal photo essay called The Forgotten Plains. I wanted to cover spots in Oklahoma that people rarely think about. That's what led me to Black Kettle National Grassland near Cheyenne, Oklahoma. I packed my truck with camping gear, some basic food and water, and my camera equipment. My dog, Max, an Australian Shepherd, climbed into the passenger seat as always. Max is the only real companion I've had since the divorce. We've been on dozens of road trips together, mostly in simpler, less eerie places. He's smart, protective, and has this funny tilt of the head whenever something confuses him. I always found it adorable, until I saw him tilt his head at things I couldn't see. We drove out on a warm Wednesday morning. The forecast said it would be mild, with maybe a few showers. I had a full phone battery, a backup battery, printed maps, just in case, and a small GPS unit. I knew I'd be one of the only people out there, which was exactly what I wanted. I yearned for solitude, for a mental reset. If I captured some good photos of rare birds or scenic vistas, that'd be the icing on the cake. When I arrived, the grassland spread before me like a rolling sea of green. The sun was relentless, beating down from a cloudless sky. I parked near a rough trail, unloaded my gear, and let Max run around a bit, hoping he'd burn off some energy before we set up camp. The air felt thick with a strange hush. Usually, in wide-open places, you hear insects, wind brushing the grass, distant bird calls. But everything was subdued. It was like the wind refused to stir. May 11th, 2022. The first day was peaceful enough. I pitched a small tent and started scouting. The phone signal was weak but existed. I took some pictures of the horizon, capturing that signature emptiness that can be both serene and unsettling. Later, I cooked a simple meal of beans and jerky over a fire. Max seemed happy, excitedly chasing grasshoppers. Just before I crawled into my sleeping bag, I noticed something bizarre. The compass I'd brought was spinning ever so slightly. Not the dramatic swirling you see in movies, but a slow, continuous drift of the needle. I tapped it, shook it. It wouldn't hold true north. I dismissed it as a cheap, faulty device and decided not to let it bother me. I woke early on the second day, rummaging for my phone to check the time, only to find it dead. My backup battery was drained too. It didn't make sense. They'd both been fully charged. "Well," I said to Max, "guess we're going old school." He just wagged his tail. I headed deeper into the grassland, camera at the ready. Oddly, the trails didn't line up with the printed map. On the map, the area should have been relatively straightforward, sweeping grass with a few short woodland clusters. But the reality in front of me felt labyrinthine. The wooded patches were bigger, the ravines deeper, like the land was shifting. At one point, I spent nearly an hour retracing my steps, convinced I was walking in circles. The same toppled tree, the same cluster of daisies by a rock, but from angles that made no sense. Max started growling at empty air. He'd lower his body, hair bristling, teeth bared, except nothing was there. I even took pictures in the direction he faced, thinking maybe I'd catch something on film. I got nothing but static-laced images, strange distortions that ruined the shots. The sense of isolation turned into creeping paranoia, like I was being watched. By mid-afternoon, I navigated back to camp, somehow. My GPS unit flickered and died the moment I tried turning it on. I'd never had it fail like that, not even in thick forests. A swirling sense of irritation and dread lodged in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it. I scrounged up some dried wood for the evening fire, determined to have a calm night. That night, the fire fought back. Every time I got a decent flame, it would sputter and smoke with a blue-green tint. It's probably just chemicals in the wood, I told myself. Maybe pesticide runoff or a weird fungus. Still, the smell was rancid, like burnt hair and copper. It was so strong that I had to step away from the smoke. Then Max vanished. I'd looked down to reach for a water bottle, and when I looked up, Max was gone. No footsteps, no yelp, just gone. I called his name, shining my headlamp around the perimeter of the camp. Nothing. I felt a spike of panic, my mind conjuring images of him wounded somewhere, or maybe he'd chased a deer. I spent hours combing the dark with a flashlight until the batteries started to dim. By the time I returned to the tent, it was near midnight, and I still couldn't find him. I hardly slept, my ears straining for any sign of him. I kept jerking awake, certain I heard claws on the grass or whimpering in the distance. But it was always just the wind, or my own imagination. In the cold gray of dawn, I woke to find my sleeping bag unzipped, from the inside, even though I was sure I'd zipped it. I also discovered my food supply had rotted overnight. Jerky, that should have been good for weeks, was moldy. My dried fruit turned to black sludge. The stench made me gag. My canteens, which had been half full, now contained water that smelled like sulfur. That morning, I found Max. He was sitting about 50 feet from the tent, staring straight at me, his eyes blank, completely milky white. I rushed over. "Max, buddy? Are you okay?" He didn't bark or wag. He was breathing, but it was shallow. He didn't even look at me, just stared at some invisible point beyond me. I put a hand on his neck, trying to soothe him, but he growled, a low rumble I'd never heard from him before. My heart squeezed with panic. This wasn't right. Was he sick? Poisoned? I tried coaxing him back into camp. Eventually, he followed, but it felt like he was an automaton, responding more to the motion of my hand than any recognition. I felt tears rising. Max was all I had out there. Something had changed him, or infected him, and I had no idea how to help. By noon, I decided I couldn't stay. I had to get out, get help for Max. I broke down the camp as quickly as I could. I realized, with mounting dread, that my backpacks had vanished. I'd left them right beside the tent. Now they were gone. Did I misplace them somewhere during my frantic search for Max the previous night? Scouring the area, I eventually found them near a shallow ditch drenched in stagnant water. My camera gear was soaked. My leftover rations, putrid. Insects crawled all over them. I told myself, we're getting out of here now. I packed what little was salvageable and tried to follow the path back to my truck. The environment seemed off. The familiar landmarks from the day before were gone or altered, like the land had rearranged. My sense of direction wavered. I kept circling back to the same gnarled bush that looked like a twisted hand. The air grew thick and hot, even though earlier it had been cool. I walked for hours, drifting aimlessly. In a stroke of desperate relief, I spotted a faint trail that looked man-made. I followed it until I came across something I never expected. A ring of scorched grass about 15 feet across, the center blackened and cracked as if from an intense heat. At the edge of this circle, I found my scattered journal pages that I always kept in a side pouch. They were arranged in a spiral pattern, pinned down with rocks. My hands shook as I picked them up. Some had my own handwriting, describing events I didn't remember, like a half-dream account of a conversation with someone named Gray. I heard a voice call my name, Daniel. I spun around, nearly dropping everything. Standing there was Becca Langley, my ex-wife's younger sister. She was 35, I think. I'd never been close to her, though I'd always found her pleasant enough. Yet, here she was, in tattered jeans, hair matted with sweat and dirt, wide-eyed and trembling. "Becca, how in the hell?" I followed you," she stammered. "You never told anyone where you went." "I was worried, She stopped mid-sentence, wincing as if her head pounded with pain. "I didn't ask you to come here," I said, heart pounding. Are you alone? Did you drive out here?" She shook her head, but offered nothing else. Then she crouched, reaching for Max. He let out a sudden snarl, lips curled. She pulled her hand back. "Easy, boy," she whispered, except she called him Charlie. "His name's Max," I corrected, my voice catching. She stared at me blankly. "Right," she mumbled. "Max, sorry, my head's just messed up." She rubbed her temples, eyes darting around, then said, "Look, can you help me? I've been wandering all night." Despite the strangeness, I felt a flare of relief not to be alone. "Yeah, I'll help you. We need to get out of here. This place is wrong." I led the way, and she followed, still shaking. She didn't have a bag or water bottle, nothing. She was limping slightly, and her face had that glazed expression like she wasn't fully there. By late afternoon, May 12th, the horizon was beginning to darken. Gray clouds gathered, and the wind picked up at last, bringing a metallic tang. We tried to find some semblance of shelter among a cluster of cottonwoods. I set up a small tarp. Becca kept muttering about a woman in the storm as she paced. I pressed her for details. Where was her car? Why hadn't she told me she was coming? She dodged every question, just repeated that she was trying to fix this. Fix what? We made a small fire. This time it only glowed a sickly yellow. Becca crouched on the opposite side, hugging her knees, staring at the flames. Max refused to come near it. I noticed my watch had stopped at 3:33 p.m. The second hand just kept twitching in place. When the flames flickered out, I discovered the wood was covered in symbols carved so shallow I hadn't noticed them. Zigzags, spirals, and pictographs. It unnerved me so badly that I tossed the half-burnt branches away. I tried to gather fresh wood. That's when Becca followed me, muttering nonsense about needing special offerings. Suddenly, she fell into a kind of trance. Without warning, she took out my knife from my belt. She must have grabbed it while I wasn't looking, and carved a similar symbol into the bark of a tree. Her eyes rolled back. It was as if she was sleepwalking. I shook her shoulders until she snapped out of it. Her eyes fluttered. "What? Daniel?" She saw the carved bark, the fresh lines of oozing sap, and nearly screamed. "What's happening to me?" I didn't know, but I realized her hand was trembling constantly. We huddled under the tarp as night fell. Thunder grumbled overhead. I tried to think rationally. "Tomorrow," I said, "we'll find the truck. We'll drive away from this nightmare." She gave me a dull nod and finally lay down. I checked on Max. He was panting, standing 10 feet away from us as if he didn't trust coming closer. In the darkness, his milky eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight in a dull haze. I dozed off, but not for long. At some point, I heard Becca's voice singing. It was a lullaby I half remembered from childhood, but the words were all wrong. Something about sleep, little blood on bone and thorn. I opened my eyes to see her crouched over Max with my knife, singing and quietly stabbing him in the shoulder. Max whined, a terrible, muffled sound. She was so focused she didn't see me jerk awake. "Becca!" I yelled. I lunged for her. She turned to me, and for an instant, her face twisted into something inhuman. Her eyes were too large, her mouth stretched into a grin that reached nearly to her ears. I tackled her, ripping the knife from her hand. She let out a guttural hiss. Max stumbled back, blood seeping onto his fur. A wave of rage and fear coursed through me. I flung the knife aside and pinned her, slamming her shoulders into the wet ground. Then she collapsed, eyes rolling back to their normal shape, mouth trembling. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling. I don't know, She started screaming when she saw the blood on her hand. I rushed to Max, trying to stop his bleeding. It didn't look lethal, more of a flesh wound, but oh God, it was so terrifying. My loyal dog, attacked by this woman I'd thought I could trust. I crawled back to Becca, my mind swirling with questions and fury. She sobbed, hugging herself. "I didn't mean to, She's inside me, Daniel. She's making me do these things." Her voice was ragged. "Who?" I demanded. But she only sobbed. Then she jerked upright, retching. She vomited a black liquid that hissed when it touched the grass. Lightning flashed, illuminating a figure in the distance. I swear I saw a hunched form, draped in ragged gray cloth, standing in the tall grass about 30 yards away. Just the silhouette. I blinked in the next flash, and it was gone. The storm finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour. I did my best to move us to a slightly drier spot under a larger cottonwood. Becca passed out almost immediately, and Max lay there, trembling but alive. I checked his wound. Whatever she'd done, it didn't look deep, but the edges were dark, as if infected instantly. I sat there in the storm, the cold rain slapping my face, too terrified to sleep. I kept seeing that silhouette in my peripheral vision. Whenever lightning flashed, I thought I glimpsed a shape creeping closer. By the time dawn arrived, I'd barely moved, my entire body stiff from tension. May 13th, I tried again to navigate. The land refused. The paths twisted, even the sun's position felt off, like it never quite rose where it should. I'd take a bearing from the sunrise, walk for 2 hours, only to find I was heading south instead of east. The trees seemed to appear and disappear. More than once we stumbled on weird scorch marks in the grass, sometimes forming circles or lines. The air seemed to ring with an unseen vibration, making my teeth ache. Max trotted behind me, limping a bit. His eyes were still milky, his behavior subdued. He let me pet him now, but it felt like petting something half sedated. I was terrified the infection would spread, but the wound stayed the same, black-edged, scabbed, but not healing. Becca followed us quietly. Every so often she'd touch her head, as if checking if she was still herself. I felt sorry for her, but also afraid. I kept the knife in my pocket now, out of her reach. At midday, we came across an old barbed wire fence. It was rusted, drooping in places. Beyond it lay a small creek and more grassland. We stepped over the fence, hopeful it might lead to a property or a road eventually. Instead, we found something worse. A pit carved into the earth about 6 feet deep. The bottom was covered in human-shaped husks, dried skins, half buried in the mud. Some lay face down. Others were curled on their sides. My stomach churned as I got closer. I recognized the rotting remains of clothing on some of them. One had a baseball cap lying near its shriveled hand. Another wore tattered jeans, the exact color I'd seen on a missing person poster once. And in that silent moment, I heard them whispering. Becca started trembling violently. "Please, let's go," she begged. But I couldn't look away. One husk near the side had hair that looked startlingly like mine. It lay there with its mouth open, no eyes, its lips pulled back to reveal teeth. At its side lay something shining in the dirt, a dog's collar. I bent down on a shaky knee. It was so filthy I couldn't read the tag until I scrubbed the mud off. The shape matched Max's, but the name scratched into the metal was Maxwell. I stared in horror. My dog's actual name. I staggered back. The husk next to it twitched, or maybe I imagined it. Becca let out a strangled cry and stumbled backwards, retreating from the pit. "Something's moving," she gasped. I grabbed her wrist, pulling her away. We ran. Max lagged behind, but we coaxed him with frantic whistles. Eventually, we collapsed near a cluster of dead trees, hearts thundering. We didn't speak for a long time. My mind reeled. If that collar belonged to Max, was the dog with me not my real dog? I shook my head, refusing to believe it. We found a place to make camp again, near some limestone outcroppings that at least provided partial shelter from the wind. Exhaustion gnawed at me. Becca's lips were cracked with dehydration and her eyes kept drifting shut. She mumbled about needing water. I tried to find some in the creek, but it was thick with algae. I had purification tablets, yet the water still stank. We had no choice but to drink it. When I handed a small portion to Max, he sniffed it and backed away, whining softly. That night, as we crouched in the gloom, time started to unravel in earnest. One moment, it was pitch black with the moon hidden behind clouds. The next, the sky flickered with sunlight. We blinked, and it was full night again, then dawn, then night. Becca started screaming, clutching her head. "She's messing with us!" she shrieked. I can see her in the corners of my eyes." I caught flickers of movement around the camp, too quick and shadowy to confirm. My watch read 3:33 p.m., but the sky told me it was after midnight. Max began pacing in circles, whimpering, the fur on his neck bristling. Who are you talking about?" I grabbed Becca by her shoulders, forcing her to focus. She shuddered, tears leaking down her filthy cheeks. "Mother Gray," she whispered. "I heard the local stories about her. She was a spirit once, from the old times. She was there during Sand Creek and Washita. The atrocities. She's haunting the land, Daniel. She kills time so we can't escape." I wanted to dismiss it as madness, but the land was twisting. The phone, the compass, the GPS, the rotted food, the illusions. I had no better explanation. I had to confront it, or we'd die out there, lost in an endless loop. Sometime in that swirling, impossible night, Max disappeared again. One moment he was at my side, the next, my hand was only gripping air. I panicked, shining my flashlight in every direction. Gone. I grabbed the knife and ran around the perimeter of the outcroppings, calling his name. My voice echoed uselessly, just empty wind. Becca stood, face pale. She moved stiffly, stepping away from me. I saw tears in her eyes, but also a weird glint, like an unnatural reflection. She turned and walked into the darkness, ignoring my calls. I wanted to run after her, but something whispered in my ear, "She's a trap." The voice sounded like my own, but with a hoarse, croaking edge. Fear rooted me in place. Then logic snapped back. I couldn't let her wander alone. I sprinted after her. She was fast, impossibly fast, weaving between low shrubs and boulders. The night flickered with lightning, revealing glimpses of her shape. Finally, I saw her standing in a ring of scorched grass near a rocky ledge. "Becca?" I approached warily. She had her back to me, her head tilted upward as if listening to something above. I caught a glimpse of clay jars circling the ring, each filled with unidentifiable black sludge. "Mother Gray," she said in a small voice. "I brought him. Let me go, please. I brought him." My blood went cold. "You? What do you mean, you brought me?" She turned around. tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I thought maybe if I delivered you, she'd free me from these visions. Free me from whatever's inside me." Her teeth began to chatter. I didn't have a choice. Before I could react, I felt a presence behind me. A cold hand, like dead leaves and static, clamped on my shoulder. I jerked away, spinning to see a hunched figure swathed in tattered gray cloth. Mother Gray. Though her face was partially obscured, I glimpsed leathery skin, empty eyes, and a grin that showed too many teeth. A stench wafted from her, a blend of rot and sulfur. I backed away, knife in hand, every instinct screaming to run. She spoke in a rasping whisper that slithered into my ears. "Daniel, you belong to me now. Your time is mine." Lightning flashed, and the ring of scorched grass glowed with a pale fire that leapt from jar to jar. Becca collapsed to her knees, wailing. In that flickering light, I saw illusions. Shadows of men on horseback, gunfire, screaming. The ground stained with blood, the atrocities of old wars, of old massacres. Mother Gray drifted closer, and I lashed out with the knife. She recoiled slightly. For an instant I saw her leg, thin, blackened bone, wreathed in withered flesh. She hissed, and I slashed again. She let out a shriek that echoed like 100 voices all layered on top of each other. Then she vanished, swirling into the wind, leaving only a foul odor. I stumbled over to Becca, who lay panting on the ground. "Becca!" I shouted. Her eyes flicked up to me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I pulled her away from the scorched circle. We found a hollow under a rocky outcrop and collapsed there, shivering. Time lost all meaning. The sky flickered from black to gray to black again. My watch read 3:33 p.m. no matter how many times I looked. Eventually, I drifted into a shallow, haunted sleep. When I woke, Becca was gone. I scanned everywhere, calling her name. No response. Just silence. Gathering my courage, I made my way back to the scorched ring, and that's when I found Becca's face, or what was left of it. It was stretched and nailed to the trunk of a dead tree. A wide strip of skin, her eyes still open and her lips parted in a silent scream. Blood dripped in slow pulses as if the tree itself was bleeding. My stomach churned and I vomited instantly, stumbling away in sheer horror. I recognized a birthmark on the peeled cheek, definitely Becca's. She'd always had that small mole. Then, unbelievably, I heard her voice. I spun around expecting some monstrous sight, but I saw her body, without a face, leaning against the tree. Her raw, exposed muscles were slick with blood, her hair matted. She was still alive, or at least still moving, her head lifted, though she had no eyes. She moaned something incoherent, a tortured gurgle. I backed away, tears streaming down my face. She needed mercy. My hand shook violently as I raised the knife. She lifted one arm as though begging me to finish it. And in a single, savage motion, I drove the blade between her ribs. Her entire form slackened and she slumped forward, spurting hot blood onto my arm. I wanted to scream. Instead, I staggered away, retching and sobbing. My mind burned with the knowledge that Becca had been used, manipulated, and then, like any of Mother Gray's pawns, brutally discarded. I had no time to mourn, no time even to recoil from my own actions. A braying cacophony of howls and moans erupted from the distance, like 1,000 tongues chanting. I glanced toward the horizon to see the pit from earlier throbbing with a bizarre, pulsating light, as if it were a massive heart beating. Something black swirled above it, forming an almost tornado-like spiral of clouds. Despite everything in me screaming not to, I walked toward it, half in a daze. My gear was gone again. I wasn't even sure I knew how to get back to the truck. If there was any chance of rescuing Max, For all I knew, the real Max was down in that pit. I had to do it. Or maybe I wanted to end this one way or another. I walked for what felt like hours, seeing glimpses of Mother Gray at the edges of my vision. A stooped figure vanishing whenever I turned to face it. The wind carried whispers, some in my own voice, others in Becca's, or in voices from my past. My father, my ex-wife, all taunting me with regrets and failures. Then the ground sloped downward, and I found the pit again. The stench was even stronger, almost unbearable. The husks twitched, some of them rising slightly. As I drew closer, I realized they weren't quite bodies, but rather shells, skins, as though the real person had been scooped out. My foot slipped on the muddy slope and I tumbled in, landing on something that gave a wet squelch. Warm fluid soaked into my pants. At the center of the pit lay a pulsing mass of half-buried roots, throbbing like veins. Each root was the thickness of an arm, black with tar-like sap dripping from them. I recognized bits of clothing, even scraps of flesh entangled in them. This was the heart of Mother Gray's domain, a swirling negativity that bent time, devoured travelers, and spat out empty husks. One husk twitched near me. Its shriveled mouth opened, releasing a hoarse whisper, "Danielle." My name in Becca's voice, then in my father's, then in my ex-wife's. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. I stood, brandishing the knife, though it felt so small against the monstrous presence filling the pit. "I'm going to end this," I whispered, voice shaking. "I'm going to burn you down." I rummaged for my lighter. By some miracle, I still had it in my pocket, though it felt oddly warm. I dug around in the mud for anything flammable. My wet bag was nowhere to be found, but I found some shredded cloth that smelled like kerosene, maybe from an older victim's gear. I wrapped the cloth around a chunk of dry bark from the pit's edge. With trembling hands, I flicked the lighter. A small flame, flickering and weak. I held it against the cloth until it caught, sparking a small torch. As I turned toward the massive roots, Mother Gray suddenly rose from the pile, a dark silhouette with her arms outstretched. She let out a shriek that caused the husks to spasm. My ears filled with a roaring static. She lunged forward, raking at me with nails that felt like sharpened bone. I stumbled back, the torch sputtering. She hissed, her breath a nauseating wave of decay. With desperate adrenaline, I thrust the torch toward the tangle of roots, letting the flames lick the thick sap. An unholy scream tore through the air as the roots caught fire, sizzling and popping with a black, greasy smoke. The husks convulsed. Mother Gray flailed, swirling around me like a storm of rags and stench. Her form flickered, like I was seeing multiple versions of her at once, some older, some younger, each twisted by hate. I swung the torch in an arc, catching her mid-lunge. Her ragged cowl caught flame, and she shrieked in 100 voices. I threw the torch onto the largest root cluster. Fire spread along the web of black veins. The pit erupted in a blaze of blue-green flames, bright and toxic, and a wave of heat slammed into me. I felt something tear at my cheek, nails scraping flesh as she tried to pull me down. But I slashed out with the knife, connecting with her leathery wrist. She howled. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of her real face. Hollow eye sockets, rotting flesh, twisted with centuries of agony. She staggered, her shriek turning into a low groan like the wind through a graveyard. I stumbled upward, half crawling along the slope to escape the smoke. The husks around me curled and deflated, releasing puffs of rancid air. I struggled free, flames licking the back of my boots. Once out of the pit, I ran, ignoring the pain in my lungs. Behind me, that terrible, shrieking chorus faded into the crackling of flames. I must have wandered for days after that. Time was meaningless. My memories are blurry, but I recall staggering under an ever-shifting sky, glimpsing Max at random intervals. Sometimes he was 100 yards ahead, just staring. Sometimes I heard him whimper behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. My thirst became maddening. My lips bled. I remember collapsing from exhaustion in a patch of dead grass. I woke to voices, human voices. A search party, men and women in uniform. They surrounded me, shining flashlights. I cried out, telling them about the pit, about the husks, about the witch. They gave me puzzled stares. They said I was found near the southern boundary of Black Kettle, not far from a dirt road. They'd been looking for me for days, apparently. When I asked about a dog, they said, "We didn't see any dog." I insisted Max was right there, but they only looked where I was pointing and saw nothing. They carried me to a truck, gave me water, took me to a small medical center in Cheyenne. I remember babbling about Becca, about what happened. They tried to find any record of her traveling to the area. There was no sign of her. My ex-wife later told me that Becca died in a car accident a week before I even went on my trip. I demanded they check again. She showed me the obituary. Her funeral was the day I left for Black Kettle. The timeline made no sense, unless the figure I met was never truly Becca at all. After a few nights under observation, I was discharged. The local authorities chalked it up to dehydration, possible exposure to toxic fumes or chemicals. They never found my campsite or the pit. My story ended up as a footnote in the local rumor mill, a crazy photographer who saw ghosts. Back home in Oklahoma City, I tried to move on, but things kept happening. I'd wake at 3:33 a.m. every night. I'd hear Becca's voice in the shower drain, or echoing in the pipes, weeping or calling my name. My mirror reflections sometimes show me older, decayed or twisted. My arms still bear faint black smudges that soap can't wash off, lines that look like witches' runes. And Max is here. Only I'm the only one who sees him. My friends think I'm delusional with grief. But I hear his nails clicking on the floor at night. I feel his presence curled at my feet. Sometimes, in the quiet of dawn, I see him at the window, staring out with those milky white eyes. I try not to talk about Mother Gray. I pretend it never happened. But I know she's still with me. Some nights, I feel a cold hand brush against my shoulder, and the faint smell of rot drifts through the room. I see scorch marks appear beneath my bed, in shapes that look so similar to what was carved on the trees. There's no escaping it. Burning the pit might have weakened her, but it certainly didn't destroy her. The worst part is that sometimes I think I hear Becca moaning in the walls or in the closet, a wet, choking sob. When that happens, I hold my breath, close my eyes, and wait for it to pass, because I know if I open the door, if I try to help, I might see that nailed face again, or the raw muscle twitching behind it. So that's my story. My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 38 years old, and in May of 2022, I went to Black Kettle National Grassland to find peace. What I found was a darkness older than anything I could imagine. I'll live with it the rest of my life, whether that life is 5 more decades or 5 more hours, because time doesn't feel so stable anymore. Sometimes I catch the clock skipping seconds or repeating them. Sometimes a whole afternoon will vanish from my memory, and I'll discover bizarre symbols on my walls. Every time it happens, I feel a faint presence behind me, whispering in a language I don't understand. I pray every day for a final release, or at least for my mind to snap in a way that erases it all. But until that day, I stand at the window with Max, watching the night, listening for that voice in the wind. I know she's still out there waiting to reclaim what's hers. And something tells me in the darkest hours that One day, she'll finish what she started. 01. My name is David Miller. I'm 37 years old, and this all happened in late August of 2025, deep within the wooded heart of McGee Creek State Park in southeastern Oklahoma. I want to believe it was just a twisted nightmare or a product of collective fear, but there's too much that I can't explain away. Even now, replaying every moment in my head, I feel no relief, no sense of closure. All I feel is dread, and a cold certainty that something is still out there. I'm not an outdoorsman, not really. I'm a city kid, born and raised in Oklahoma City, with a desk job analyzing budgets for a small manufacturing company. I decided to plan this trip because I needed something, anything, to prove to myself that I wasn't broken after my divorce. My wife left me 6 months prior, and I spent the better part of those months either at the office or on my couch, ignoring the world. Then, on a whim, I bought a tent, a pair of hiking boots, and a cheap compass. I asked a couple of people to join me, hoping that the trip would not only help me reconnect with nature, but also force me out of the hollow cave of my misery. I ended up inviting Caleb Reyes, a co-worker in our IT department, and my cousin, Nora Carter. Caleb is 38, sarcastic, and far more comfortable in front of a keyboard than in the woods. He once had a serious brush with the law, a DUI where he nearly hit a pedestrian, and ever since he's been extra cautious, constantly warring with guilt. I think he saw this trip as an opportunity to prove something to himself, too. Nora is 29. She's one of those bright, almost reckless spirits who loves social media and new experiences in equal measure. She's my late aunt's daughter, and though we're not super close, I've always admired her boldness. At first, she was reluctant. She'd never heard of McGee Creek, but the moment I mentioned it was secluded and would make for great pictures, she said yes. My final companion was my black Labrador, Max. Max had been my dog for 4 years, and I trusted his instincts more than I trusted my own. If he growled at someone, I listened. If he liked someone, I relaxed. After my wife left, Max became my constant anchor to sanity, always there, always ready to take me on a walk or curl up by my side. I reserved a backcountry camping permit for 4 nights. The rangers at the welcome station gave us a few quick warnings. The trails in the deeper sections weren't all well marked, so we should keep to the main loops. Watch out for snakes, and store food properly because of raccoons and other critters. The usual, nothing about weird sightings or ghost stories. We drove to the start of a trail near the southwestern side of the park, loaded with thick canopies of oak, hickory, and pine. We parked, gathered our gear, and set off into the woods. If I recall correctly, it was about a 2-hour hike to get to the remote campsite that had a small clearing, a fire ring, and not much else. Cell service cut in and out, so we all put our phones on airplane mode to conserve battery. I remember feeling excited, even as a drizzle of sweat rolled down my back from the late summer humidity. The first night, we set up our tents, one for me and Max, one for Nora, and one for Caleb. We had an early dinner cooked over a portable propane burner. Nora kept complaining that her GPS was acting up, refusing to show her current location, and that her phone battery seemed to be draining too quickly despite being on airplane mode. Caleb joked that maybe the park was a government black site. We laughed. We had no idea how much we'd come to hate that glitching technology soon enough. That night, we tried to start a campfire in the old fire ring. The wood was dry, the tinder good, but the flames never caught properly. They would flare for a moment, flicker, and then go out with an audible hiss. It made no sense. We tried again and again, using cotton balls with petroleum jelly as fire starters, an old camping trick, but it was like the flames didn't want to stay in the pit. Eventually, we gave up and sat there in the dark with flashlights. Nora teased us about failing at manly tasks. After an hour or so, we called it a night. In the silence that followed, I thought I heard faint crying. It was so distant that I couldn't be sure if it was a human voice or an animal. Max perked his ears, let out a low growl, but didn't bark. I shone my flashlight into the woods. Nothing. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the usual nighttime sounds that carry farther in the forest. Morning came without further incident. Caleb complained of weird dreams, but shrugged it off. Nora was already up, vaping by the creek that wound near our campsite, trying to get signal. I brewed some instant coffee, fed Max, and took a moment to appreciate the fresh air. Then I noticed that my sleeping bag was partially unzipped when I woke from the inside, as if I'd gotten up in the middle of the night. But I hadn't. I'm a light sleeper, and I would have remembered. Caleb and Nora both said the same thing. Their bags had been unzipped too, though none of us remembered leaving our tents. Nora teased that we might have sleepwalked in unison. It was weird, but not terrifying, at least not yet. We decided we'd do a day hike off the main trail, crossing the creek and heading deeper into the park. We had a map and our compasses should have sufficed, but the map and the terrain never quite matched. A fork in the trail that should have been there simply wasn't. Our compasses pointed north, but the sun was overhead in such a way that it felt like the compasses were out of alignment. Caleb tested them with a small magnet from his watch strap, but they appeared functional. Nora's phone GPS still refused to work right. As we walked, we realized that an hour had passed, but we felt it should have been 3 hours, or 10 minutes. Time itself seemed to warp, or we were just too tired and disoriented to keep track. Max was on edge, snapping at shadows, whimpering sometimes at nothing. We spent most of the day wandering before giving up and retracing our steps to camp. It was late afternoon by the time we got back. We found the camp disturbed, like someone had gone through our gear. Food had been tossed around, and some items were missing. A flashlight, a first aid kit, a spare sleeping pad. Initially, we suspected animals. Raccoons, or maybe a feral hog rummaging through things, but none of the packaging was chewed. It looked more like a sloppy, curious rummage. That night, we managed to build a small fire with the leftover wood we scrounged, though it was feeble. We tried to dry out some gear that felt inexplicably damp. Then, just as we were settling in, Caleb got up and walked beyond the campsite. He didn't say anything, just left with a concerned expression. I asked him where he was going, and he muttered something like, "I hear her. She's crying." He had a flashlight. Nora and I looked at each other. We both heard nothing. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I called his name, no answer. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight, told Nora to stay put, and went after him. Max came along. We found Caleb near the creek, sitting on a small boulder, his face pale, soaked from the waist down as if he'd been waiting. His arms trembled. "Hey, man, what are you doing?" I asked, shining my light on him. He stared at me with wide eyes. "I only walked for maybe 10 minutes," he said. "I followed the sound, that crying. Then I just woke up here." "How long has it been?" I told him nearly half an hour. He insisted it had only been a few minutes, no more than that. I helped him up, and we headed back to camp. He kept saying, "She sounded so sad. She kept calling my name." When we got him back, Nora was panicking, on the verge of tears. She said the wind had changed direction, and she'd heard a whale pass right over the tents. My spine prickled at her words. We made the best of the night, though none of us slept well. I kept waking to every little snap in the forest. Caleb mumbled in his sleep, eyes rolling under his lids. Nora kept coughing. Max, usually so calm, was trembling at my feet. The next morning, tension was high. We considered packing up and going home, but no one wanted to be the first to say we were too scared to continue. In hindsight, we should have left right then. Around midday, Nora decided to gather more wood for the fire. She wandered off about 300 yards, still within earshot. I was reorganizing gear with Max at my side, and Caleb was trying to fix the busted first aid kit. After maybe 10 minutes, I called out for her to check if she was okay. Silence. Then we heard twigs snapping in the distance, so I figured she was coming back, but she never returned. 40 minutes later, I walked into the trees to look for her. I found scattered sticks by the trunk of a large oak, but no sign of Nora. When I yelled her name, only echoes came back. Part of me was rationalizing that she just wandered a bit too far and would reappear, but inside, panic was blossoming. Caleb joined me, and together we branched out in small circles. Time stretched. An hour? 2 hours? My phone, which I'd turned on to check the time, displayed 2:14 p.m., then 2:14 p.m. again, like it had frozen. Finally, we decided to return to camp and hope she'd come back on her own. She did, long after the sun began to sink. It was nearly twilight when I saw her silhouette approaching. I almost cried with relief. But as she got closer, the hairs on my neck rose. Her posture was too upright, her steps too measured, and her face, she was smiling. Not a happy smile, but something tense and forced. She came straight to the fire ring, placed an armful of wood down, and just stood there, blinking slowly. "Where the hell were you?" I demanded, trying not to sound too angry but failing. "We've been looking for you for hours." She blinked twice, tilting her head. "I was just out," she said quietly, gathering wood. No explanation for why she'd been gone for so long. I asked if she was hurt, and she shook her head. She stared at me for too long, her eyes unblinking, that slight smile never leaving her lips. I turned to Caleb for support. He looked equally creeped out. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she simply didn't mention the hours she'd disappeared, that set both of us on edge, but she was Nora, wasn't she? We all tried to eat together, though the mood was thick with confusion. Nora picked at her food, nibbling on a granola bar without really swallowing. Occasionally, she'd glance at the tent where Max and I slept, her gaze lingering. Max growled low whenever she was too close. I remember her reaction. No fear, no offense taken, just curiosity. That night, Caleb and I were too uneasy to sleep. Nora, however, lay down in her tent early and said nothing more. Near midnight, I heard a zipper slide open and soft footsteps. I crawled from my tent, flashlight in hand, and saw Nora standing over Caleb's tent, one hand on the mesh flap as if she was about to go inside. She was staring down at him as he slept. I said her name, and she turned to face me. Blood trickled from her left nostril. Her eyes were unfocused, yet that thin-lipped smile remained. She took a step back, said nothing, and walked off into the dark. I went to Caleb, shook him awake. We stayed by the dwindling fire until dawn, every nerve on high alert. Max never stopped growling that entire night, hackles raised. When the sun finally rose on what should have been our third day, I decided enough was enough. We'd break camp, pack everything, and leave. But we had a problem. Some of our crucial supplies, like my spare car key, the first aid kit, most of our food, were gone, just vanished. The food we did have left looked rotten, covered in slimy mold that definitely wasn't there the day before. The water we'd filtered smelled metallic. Worse still, we realized none of our phones or watches displayed consistent times. While I argued with Caleb about the best way to hike out, Nora spoke up in that same whispery tone. "Why rush? We have so much time." I can still see her grin in my mind's eye as I asked if she remembered anything from her long absence. She shrugged. It's all connected. The tears, the water, you'll see. Then she gave a soft laugh that made my skin crawl. An hour later, we found Caleb's body by the creek. I wish I could say we discovered it gradually, with clues leading up to that horror, but it was abrupt and sickening. We'd split up briefly to find him after he stormed off, cursing that he'd find the damned trail himself. I went left, Nora went right. Or at least that's what I thought. Max ran ahead, barking, then whimpering. I followed and saw the water turn red. Caleb lay half submerged, the top half of his body splayed out on the bank. His throat was torn open, blood soaking into the mud. One of his eyes was missing, as if gouged out. His hands were twisted and bent backward in a way that suggested intense force. It was no accident, no simple animal attack. There were bruises shaped like fingers around his wrists. I started shouting, cursing, trying to process what I was seeing. Max howled. Then I heard footsteps behind me. It was Nora, or the thing wearing Nora's shape, staring down at Caleb's broken form. She seemed almost amused, her head cocked to one side, that twisted smile etched on her face. "That's horrible," she said, in the flattest, emptiest voice possible. "Poor Caleb." My anger flared. I screamed at her, asked how this happened, if she saw anything. She just watched me with those dull eyes. Then she said, "I guess it was a bear." A bear? The footprints along the muddy bank were human. I tried to show her, but she only repeated in a monotone. A bear. I noticed fresh scratches on her forearms, and when I asked about them, she just brushed her fingers over the wounds as if they didn't hurt. "I don't remember," she said. I backed away from her. Something in my gut told me I was face to face with whatever monstrous force was inhabiting Nora's body. Or maybe Nora had snapped, lost her mind entirely. In that moment, it seemed either possibility was equally plausible. I knelt down to close Caleb's eyes, forgetting that one was gone. I wanted to move him away from the water. The moment I touched him, a wave of cold dread passed through me like an electric shock. My mind swam with fleeting images. A woman sobbing in the dark, hanging bones from tree branches. A flicker of pale hands pressing against a glass surface. I jerked back, nearly fell into the creek and retched. I forced myself to stand. "Nora, help me get him out of the water," I said, though the rational part of me screamed that it wasn't safe. She took a step forward, her movements stiff like a puppet on strings. She bent down to grab Caleb's arm, and then she froze. Her body trembled violently for a second. Then she laughed, a short, breathy giggle that ended in a choking cough. "I can't do this," she whispered, eyes fluttering. "We belong to her now." I dropped Caleb's arm, spinning to face her. "What do you mean? Who is her?" She just shook her head, that grin twisting into a grimace as if she was about to sob. We left Caleb's body there. I hate myself for that, but I was in shock, and we had no way to carry him. I had to find a way out, maybe get the rangers. If rangers still existed in a place where time distorted and the forest seemed alive with malice. Max barked to get moving. Nora walked with me but kept trailing behind. I'd glance back to see her picking at her nails, stumbling, or just staring off into the trees. At one point, I swear I saw another Nora, deeper in the woods, watching us with a blank face. I looked back at the person walking behind me, then again at the figure. The second figure vanished in a blink. My heart nearly stopped. I tried to keep my focus forward, but every few steps I'd look back. Once, I even grabbed Nora's wrist and squeezed it, half expecting my hand to go through her like a ghost. But she was solid. I can't say how long we wandered, but The sun's position seemed wrong. One moment it was midday, the next it was setting. My watch read 10:19 a.m., then jumped to 7:54 p.m. It made no sense. Trees shifted. The creek we thought we'd left behind would appear again as if we'd made no progress. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small clearing that I didn't recognize, though it had a sign that read Backcountry Site #4. Strange wind chimes hung from the trees at the perimeter, made of bones and small stones. The slightest breeze made them clack together, creating a haunting melody. The stench of something long dead hung in the air. Max whimpered, tail tucked, refusing to go further. Nora stepped into the clearing without hesitation. She reached up and touched one of the dangling bone chimes. "They keep her company," she said softly, as if explaining. "She's always crying, you know. She'll never stop." She turned to me, and for a split second her expression flickered, like genuine fear or sorrow broke through. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank calm. I followed her in, ignoring every survival instinct I had because I needed answers. At the center of the clearing was a large rock with carvings on it. Crude shapes, words I couldn't read. A figure that looked like a woman with lines trailing from her eyes like tears. It unnerved me, but I forced myself to approach, feeling as though I was stepping onto sacred, cursed ground. That's when I saw something hanging from a low branch. A body suspended by braided vines and fishing line. As I got closer, I realized it was Nora, my cousin Nora, her mouth open in a silent scream, arms pinned behind her back. She was obviously dead, flesh bloated and pale. I nearly passed out, yet the Nora I'd followed stood right next to me. There were two of them. My mind couldn't process it. I spun to face the living copy, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode from my chest. She looked at the dead form, blinked slowly, and for the first time, I saw a genuine expression of emotion on her face. She smiled, wide and terrible. "I'm not her," she whispered. "I never was. She drowned in the creek 2 days ago, just like... Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't tell you. I wanted to run, but my legs froze. The dog barked, hackles raised. The Nora thing reached out and gently touched my cheek. Her hand felt cold, wet, like it had been submerged in ice water. My breath caught as something in my mind flickered. Images of drowning, people screaming, a figure dragging them under. "It's okay, David," she said in a gentle, mocking tone. "She wanted this to happen. She asked for help once. She wanted her mother's love. It's too late now. Don't you want to see your ex-wife again? She's waiting for you, by the water." As she spoke, I heard a familiar voice behind me, my ex-wife's voice. I can't describe the heartbreak and confusion that ripped through me. I turned, and for an instant I saw her standing among the trees, calling my name. She looked just as she did the day she left, wearing that same coat. It couldn't be real, but the force of longing nearly made me step toward her. Max barked frantically, snapping me out of it. I clamped my eyes shut and shook my head. The voice faded, replaced by a guttural growl from the Nora thing. She stared at me with open hostility now, her lips curling back to reveal far too many teeth, as though her gums had receded. She lunged for me. I scrambled away, nearly tripping on a tree root, and she managed to rake her nails across my arm, leaving burning scratches. Max leapt at her, snapping. She staggered back, hissing like some feral creature. Then, with impossible speed, she sprinted off into the woods, leaving me panting and shaking. I looked at the body hanging from the branch. My real cousin, Nora, dead. I tried to scream, to cry, but no sound came out. My entire world was madness. At that point, all I could think to do was get out no matter what. I stumbled away from the clearing, dog at my heels, ignoring the fact that the sun was somehow too bright for the late hour. My mind told me I was heading north, but the compass on my phone, which had about 9% battery left, spun wildly. I forced myself to keep walking in one direction, repeatedly checking for any sign of a main trail or road. Time lost all meaning. I'd walk for a while, see the sky lighten as if dawn had arrived, then glance to see a setting sun. Trees seemed to loom closer every time I blinked. Occasionally, I'd see a flicker of movement, something that looked like Nora or like Caleb, a silhouette reaching out from behind a trunk. My heart hammered with every step, but I refused to stop. I whispered to Max, telling him we'd get out, that everything would be okay. Eventually, I came across a shallow ravine where black water trickled over moss-covered rocks. A shape stood in the water, turned away from me, a woman with long hair matted to her shoulders. She was sobbing. As I approached, she began to speak, though not in English. Her words were distorted, watery, echoing in my ears. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face was a contorted mask of grief, her eyes streaming with dark fluid. Her mouth opened wide, releasing a sound so piercing it felt like nails scraping my skull. My ears rang. Max barked in terror. I recognized this as the presence behind everything. The Banshee, the crying spirit, Leah, though I only learned that name in a flash of memory I couldn't place, as if she pressed it into my mind. My eyes stung, tears streaming, as a wave of sorrow flooded me. I fell to my knees in the stream, water soaking my pants, wanting to sob uncontrollably. The Banshee's face was heartbreak incarnate, and she stepped toward me. I was almost lost in that grief. My mind teetered on an edge. But Max bit my arm. Not enough to wound me badly, just enough to jolt me with pain. I gasped. The sorrow loosened its grip. I saw the Banshee's mouth turned downward, displeased. "You shouldn't be here," she said. And the voice echoed with that watery resonance, as though multiple voices overlapped. "You who do not weep, you must join my lament." She lunged at me, her fingers elongating into claws that dripped with black water. I scrambled for anything to defend myself. My pack had a small, collapsible steel mirror, a leftover vanity item I'd used to check for ticks. With clumsy hands, I grabbed it, thrust it forward. She hissed, rearing back as if the reflection repelled her. The water around us frothed. Max barked and leapt at her, but she batted him away with supernatural strength. He yelped, rolling across the stream bed. Anger flared in me. If she killed Max, I'd never forgive myself. I lunged forward. The mirror held like a knife and slashed at her face. She screamed, an unholy sound that shook the trees. The reflective surface cut into one of her eyes, black liquid oozing. The effect was immediate. She staggered backward, howling. The entire forest seemed to vibrate with her rage. Seizing the moment, I grabbed Max, ignoring the pain in my muscles, and fled. Behind me, the Banshee's cries echoed, like a storm swirling in the distance. The forest's color seemed to warp, the sky flickering between twilight and noon. Shadows twisted. My heart pounded, my breathing ragged. But I refused to stop. Time, again, lost meaning. I half ran, half limped through the wilderness. At some point, I realized the ground was leveling out, the trees thinning. I saw the glint of a road through the trunks. Relief surged. Breaking through the last of the brush, I stumbled onto a dirt access road. I recognized it vaguely from the drive-in. My legs wobbled, and I collapsed on the dusty ground, gasping. Max lay beside me, panting, whining softly. I stroked his fur and tried to assure him it was okay. My watch read 3:07 a.m., but the sky was bright as midday. I cradled my head in my hands, tears slipping out. Then a rattling engine. A dark green pickup truck rumbled along the dirt road, the words, "Park Ranger," on its side. Relief, like I'd never known, filled me. I flagged the vehicle down, and the ranger hopped out. He was a tall man, mid-40s maybe, in uniform. He had a friendly face, but something about his gaze made me hesitate. "Got yourself lost, friend?" he asked calmly. "You look like hell." I told him we'd been camping near the creek, that my friend was dead, that my cousin was... My voice broke off. I sobbed, trying to form the words. He stared at me with an almost serene expression, no shock at the mention of death. "Dead, you say?" he repeated, his tone neutral. Well, that's not good. I stumbled to my feet, leaning on the truck for support. "Please," I begged. "We need to get the police, an ambulance, something." Max barked, uneasy. The ranger gave Max a long look, then turned his gaze back to me, an odd smile tugging at his lips. "Of course," he said. "Hop in, we'll sort this out. You want to go back for your friends?" I recoiled at the question. Why would I go back there to that horror? "No," I managed, my voice a trembling whisper. "No, I can't. They're gone." He smiled again, a bit too wide, and nodded. "You will," he said quietly, "but let's get you to safety first." My stomach flipped as I recognized that smile. It was the same unnatural tilt of the lips that Nora had after she returned from the woods. I opened my mouth to protest, but my voice failed. A cold dread filled my chest. The ranger's eyes flicked to the gashes on my arm, then the smears of dried blood on my clothes. He took a step closer. I didn't run. I was too exhausted, too defeated, and part of me hoped I was just being paranoid. I climbed into the passenger seat, Max at my feet. The ranger started the engine. I kept glancing at his face, noticing how he didn't blink often enough, how every few moments his cheeks twitched in a slight, involuntary grin. As we drove, the sun overhead dimmed unnaturally, like a cloud passed. I looked out the window and saw the forest, mile after mile, as if it went on forever. No sign of the main road, no sign of the park entrance. I felt my heart sink again. Maybe I wasn't out of the woods at all. The last words the ranger spoke before darkness seemed to swallow the horizon were, "You belong to her, you know. We all do." The rest was lost in the chaos of my mind unraveling anew. That's where my memory of the event ends. A day later, at least that's how it felt, I was found unconscious on the shoulder of Highway 3, half a mile from the official park boundary. According to the people who found me, I was delirious and dehydrated, clutching Max as though he were the only thing keeping me alive. My phone was in my pocket, battery dead, showing 2:14 p.m. still. My watch was cracked, the time frozen at 7:54. The authorities took my statement. They combed the area. They found no sign of the campsite or my companions. No bodies. No clearing with bone chimes, nothing. They didn't believe me, of course. They chalked it up to dehydration, hallucinations, maybe a psychotic break. I told them about Caleb, about Nora. There were no official missing person reports for them, except the ones filed by their families a week later. The rangers I spoke to insisted no one matching Caleb's or Nora's descriptions had checked in or out, though I had the permit receipt. The authorities concluded that if my friends had indeed entered the park, they must have left by another route or, well, it remains unsolved. To this day, I still dream about that clearing. Sometimes, in these nightmares, I see the hanging corpse that is clearly Nora. Sometimes, I see the other Nora, smiling at me with that unblinking stare. Sometimes, I see Caleb's battered body, the water around him turning black. And sometimes I see the banshee Laya, mourning something I can't begin to understand, offering me illusions of my ex-wife, pulling me back into that cursed loop. Max survived, physically unscathed except for a bruised rib, but he wakes up at night barking at shadows. Sometimes, when we go for walks, he stops and growls at random strangers, particularly if they smile too broadly or stare a second too long. I can't blame him. I've moved away from Oklahoma City. I couldn't stand to be so close to McGee Creek. I had nightmares that I'd hear crying in the middle of the night and step outside to find the forest had grown around my house, the trees looming, beckoning me back. I've tried therapy, medication, all the usual routes. None of it truly helps. The police never found any sign of my cousin or my friend's remains. I attended a small memorial service for them at my uncle's place. He's broken, and for that, I carry a guilt I can't shake. People ask me if I made it all up, if it was some coping mechanism for stress and guilt. Sometimes I wish it was, but I remember the smell of Caleb's blood, the feel of Nora's cold hand on my cheek, and the sight of that ranger's too wide grin. Those things are as real to me as the keyboard I'm typing on, even more real in some ways. I share this story not for pity, nor to exonerate myself from blame in my friend's disappearance. I share it because there's a chance, no matter how slim, that someone else might be drawn to those deep woods of McGee Creek, searching for escape or adventure. If you ever find yourself there, especially if you hear crying at night, turn around. Run. Don't follow the sound, don't investigate. The moment you sense that something is wrong with time, when your watch and phone become unreliable, get out. Stop everything and go. I escaped with my life and my dog, but I lost pieces of myself in those dark hollows. My faith in logic, my sense of security, my friends, and I'm not even sure I truly escaped. Sometimes, when I lie in bed, I think about that final drive with the ranger. I wonder if I'm still in the forest, hallucinating a normal life. Perhaps the banshee is keeping me imprisoned in a loop of false security until the time is right to claim me. And now, whenever I see a stranger smile at me on the street, I fight the urge to run the other way. I can't help but watch how long they hold that grin, how often they blink, how they form their words. Because if I see that same unblinking stare, that same predator's calm, I know I'll be right back where I started, hearing the sobs in the dark, feeling the weight of the water closing in over my head. I wish I could end by telling you I found closure, that I performed some ritual that laid the spirits to rest, or that the ranger was apprehended and unmasked as some twisted murderer. But nothing like that happened. The official records remain inconclusive, and I remain haunted. Maybe that's the price for dabbling where we had no right to go. Maybe that's how it ends for people who stumble upon old, unimaginable forces in the backwoods of Oklahoma. Or maybe it never really ends at all. My name is Eleanor Ellie Graves, and I'm 41 years old. This happened in October of 2024, when I took my first real solo trip in a used RV, determined to find some kind of peace in the deep woods of southeastern Oklahoma. I'd recently finalized my divorce, and after the roller coaster of splitting assets, signing forms, and shedding tears over a life I thought I'd have forever, I felt a powerful need to escape. My ex-husband and I had no children, so there was nothing else tying me down, no reason not to pack up and see if solitude could heal me where everything else had failed. I wasn't a seasoned RVer. I'd only taken short day trips and borrowed campers when I was married. But impulsively, I bought a small Class B camper van from an older couple in Texas who promised it was road-ready and perfect for boondocking. The van was old, with a shaky generator and chipped paint, but I fell in love with the sense of freedom it promised. I loaded it with essentials: canned goods, first aid supplies, extra fuel, a big water jug, and my personal items. I chose Ouachita National Forest because I'd visited it once before, years ago. I remembered the rugged beauty, the thick canopy of pines and hardwoods, and the feeling of being miles from anywhere. The forest runs between Arkansas and Oklahoma, but I plan to explore the Oklahoma side near Big Cedar, which is famously remote. The nearest actual town is small and easy to miss if you blink at the wrong time. That was exactly what I wanted. No phone calls, no traffic, no memories of the life I was trying to forget. The first day, I drove along a series of winding highways that narrowed until they were barely wide enough for 2 lanes. I passed rustic cabins, dusty gas stations, and eventually even those disappeared. By late afternoon, the paved road turned into a rough dirt track. A wooden sign, faded and riddled with bullet holes, read Big Cedar, 11 miles. The GPS on my phone had stopped giving me directions a while back, so I was relying on an old road atlas. I followed the dirt track deeper into the forest. The light filtering through the trees took on that slanted golden hue that makes everything look half dreamlike. I finally arrived at what the atlas called a primitive RV site. In truth, it was just a sloped clearing with a weather-beaten picnic table and a fire ring. I could see the remnants of older campsites, soot stains in a circle, footprints in the dirt, a scattering of beer cans. This was not an official campground with hookups or a bathhouse. It was real wilderness, silent except for the wind rattling leaves overhead. The sun was getting low, so I quickly parked the van on the flattest patch of ground I could find. My first relief was that the generator started on the second try, giving me power for the lights and the small refrigerator inside. Even though I was alone, I spoke aloud. "You can do this, Ellie." It felt good to hear my own voice. I took out my folding chair, set it near the fire ring, and let myself breathe the crisp evening air. No calls from lawyers, no tense emails from my ex, no nosy neighbors. Just me, the forest, and the promise of a calmer future. Night descended quickly. I'd brought firewood in the van, so I built a modest campfire and heated up a can of soup. The forest around me was quiet, but not unnervingly so. Crickets chirped, the wind sighed in the branches, and I sometimes heard rustling in the underbrush that made me think of deer or smaller creatures. The loneliness felt raw, and yet somehow comforting. I told myself I might finally get a decent night's sleep. That hope lasted until just before midnight. It began as a faint scratching at the van's sliding door. I'd been sitting inside, reading by a dim overhead light, so at first I thought it might be a branch scraping in the wind. Then came 3 gentle knocks, almost polite. A chill spread over my neck and shoulders. I set my book down and stood. "Hello?" I called through the door, my voice quavering. No answer. I was reluctant to open the door, but I felt a pang of guilt at the thought of ignoring someone in need. When I finally slid the door open, there was nothing, just the darkness, the dying embers of my fire, and the black silhouettes of tall pines. I stepped down, flashlight in hand, making a slow circle around the van. The ground was soft dirt and pine needles. If someone had been here, they left no footprints. I felt like a fool, but also uneasy. I climbed back in, locked the door, and resolved to ignore any odd noises for the rest of the night. I managed a few hours of uneasy sleep. At some point, I dreamed of a child crying outside my window, but the details vanished when I woke, heart pounding. By then, it was almost dawn. I chalked the dream up to post-divorce stress and turned over, eventually falling into a dreamless sleep. The next morning, bright sunshine streamed through the windows. A sense of normalcy returned. Nighttime fears often evaporate with the first rays of daylight. I made coffee on my small propane stove and enjoyed it outside, savoring the forest's perfume of fresh pine and damp earth. Looking at my campsite in the daylight, I decided it wasn't spooky at all, just remote. I felt proud of myself for sticking it out. I spent that day hiking a short loop trail near the site. My phone found no signal, which I'd expected. I took pictures, scribbled a few notes in my journal about the things I saw. I'd been a teacher for special needs kids back in Fort Worth, and I wrote about all the ways I could describe these woodlands if I ever had to teach a lesson on nature. The hours slid by easily. Toward evening, I returned to the van to find that the water in my half-full plastic jug smelled wrong. A metallic, almost rotten odor. The jug had been sealed, but the water was rancid. I dumped it out onto the ground. I still had a second jug. Thankfully, that one was fine. It bothered me, though. Had it gone bad that fast in the warmth of the van? Possible, but something about the smell was off. I looked inside the van for any sign of a leak or contamination. Nothing. Then I realized a framed photograph of my old golden retriever, Sunny, had fallen off the small shelf above the kitchenette. The glass was cracked. I muttered in irritation as I picked it up. I'd lost Sunny to cancer 2 years ago, and I still missed her every day. That photo was the only one I'd brought. It wasn't surprising that it fell. Maybe I'd driven over too many bumps. I put it back on the shelf, trying to wedge it so it wouldn't move. That second night was colder. Clouds had gathered, making the campsite darker. I tried to build a fire again, but the wood refused to catch, as if it were damp. I gave up and cooked a quick meal on the propane stove. Then I retreated into the van. As I went to lock the door, I noticed small footprints in the dirt near the driver's side. They were definitely child-sized bare feet, the toes pressed deep into the mud as though whoever made them was standing for a while. A prickle of unease gripped my spine. It was not impossible a child was around. Some families do camp in the forest. But where were they? I dragged my folding chair around the van in a wide sweep, scanning the trees with my flashlight. "Hello?" I called, my breath visible in the chilly air. "Is anyone out there? Are you lost?" No reply. Everything was still, only the sound of a breeze stirring the treetops. Finally, I decided there was little I could do in the dark. I got back in, locked up, and double-checked every window latch. Feeling irrational but unsettled, I pulled the curtains tight. Then I lay in bed, reading until fatigue claimed me around 10. Sometime past midnight, I jolted awake to the faintest hum of static. My overhead lights had flickered on by themselves. The tiny radio built into the control panel for the van's generator was on, crackling with static. I sat up, heart drumming. I swear I'd turned everything off before bed. As I fumbled with the switch, I heard a child's voice through the static. Fleeting, as if from a distant station. I couldn't make out words, just the tonal pattern of a little boy or girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, singing or humming. My skin tightened until it felt too small for my body. I pressed the radio's power button repeatedly, but it wouldn't turn off at first. Then, with a pop, the static died. That was when I heard a soft knocking at the driver's side window. The van's curtains were closed, but the knock was unmistakable. Knuckles tapping lightly on glass. My instincts screamed not to answer, yet my curiosity battled me. If there truly was a child out there, I couldn't just ignore them. I slid off the bed and crept forward, leaning as close as I dared. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking. I reached for the curtain's edge. My heart pounded so forcefully I could hear my pulse in my ears. I pushed the curtain aside a few inches and shone a small flashlight onto the window. A young boy's face stared back at me. He looked maybe 8 years old, with short, dark hair, skin streaked with dirt, and large, pleading eyes. My light's glare reflected in those eyes like little white sparks. He wore overalls, the fabric fraying at the edges, no shoes. The boy just stood there, arms at his sides, gazing at me through the glass without blinking. I yelped, nearly dropping the flashlight. My mind spun with questions. Where did he come from? Why was he alone? Was he injured? I forced myself to breathe, then opened the driver's side door an inch, the interior light flicking on. The child stepped back a foot, still staring. "Hey, buddy," I said gently. "Are you lost?" He nodded slowly, but said nothing. His lips parted as if to speak, but the words didn't come. I noticed now how dirty his bare feet were. Cuts and scrapes lined his ankles. "Where are your parents?" I asked. He just shook his head, then finally spoke in a whispery voice. "Can I come in?" The question was strangely formal for a child. He took another half-step forward. I was torn. Everything I knew about children and empathy told me to help him, but some primal, deep instinct recoiled, warning me that something was off. The boy's eyes seemed too bright under the flashlight's beam, reflecting more than they should. And there was that smell again, that faint metallic rot, stronger now. I swallowed hard. "Sweetheart, maybe I can help you find your parents or call a ranger, but—" "Please," he said, voice cracking. "I'm so cold." He reached out a small hand toward the door. My hand trembled on the latch. Something in me screamed not to let him in, not yet. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm Ellie." He paused, blinking once. "Micah," he finally answered, as if testing the name. "Let me in, please." His eyes flicked behind me, to the dim interior of the van. I glanced down at his feet. My maternal instincts flared, along with fear. "Micah, I'll get you a blanket, okay? Just stay right there." I didn't open the door any wider. Instead, I scrambled back to the bed, rummaging for a spare throw blanket. When I returned to the front, the boy was gone. The window was empty. Outside, the forest was pitch black, no sign of movement. I jumped out of the driver's seat and opened the door fully, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. No footprints, no rustling of leaves, just emptiness. I even circled the van in my slippers, calling his name. No response. Eventually, I gave up, terrified but uncertain. Had I imagined him entirely? Sleep didn't come easy that night. When the pale dawn arrived, I felt more exhausted than ever. I tried to salvage the morning by brewing fresh coffee, but as I poured water from my backup jug into the coffee maker, I noticed a faint odor of something rotting. Panic seized me. Was this jug bad now, too? I tentatively sipped a drop of the water from my palm. It tasted like iron and rotten eggs. I spat it onto the ground, cursing. My water supply was ruined again. I still had bottled water in the fridge, 4 liters or so. Enough for a day or two if I rationed carefully. But what if I had to stay longer? That thought made me uneasy. My best option was to leave. Find a more populated campground or a store where I could restock water and maybe get help if there really was a lost child wandering around. I certainly didn't want to keep running into bizarre phenomena alone. I decided to pack up and go, but a quick check of my phone revealed it was dead. The battery drained completely. That was no big shock. My phone had been searching for a signal for days. When I plugged it into the van's cigarette lighter charger, the charging icon flickered sporadically, refusing to hold a charge. The generator, oddly, was only giving partial power. I used some language I won't repeat, fed up with these inconveniences, and told myself I'd figure it out once I reached a proper road. So I secured everything, latched the fridge, made sure the van's compartments were locked, then climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started on the second try. With a sense of relief, I started driving back up the dirt track I'd come in on, except the track didn't look the same. The ruts, the tire marks from my own arrival, I couldn't see them. I'd been so sure it was a single path in and out, but the ground ahead looked untraveled. The forest closed in tighter, branches scraping the van's sides. I told myself it was just a slightly different route and pressed on. After 20 minutes of bumping through the trees, I found myself at a split, left or right, with no signage. The atlas was on the passenger seat, but it didn't show any fork in the road for several miles. I ended up taking the left route, hoping it would curve around to the main forest road. Instead, it quickly ended in dense brush. I had to reverse out, cursing at how the van's rear tires spun in loose dirt. I tried the right fork. That ended in a steep ravine, another dead end. Growing more distressed, I circled back, only to realize I'd lost track of which way I'd come from. The forest was a maze of nearly identical pines and oaks. My throat constricted with worry. I told myself that if I kept heading generally north or west, I'd eventually find the main road. I used the van's built-in compass for direction, but the needle spun erratically, as if confused. I spent what felt like hours creeping through the woods, paranoid about falling into a ditch. The clouds overhead thickened, dimming the sunlight. Occasionally, I thought I saw a small figure dart behind a tree. Whenever I stopped and peered into the gloom, there was nothing. The sense of being watched sank into my bones. Finally, the track opened up a bit, and I saw an old battered sign on the ground. I pulled over and got out to examine it. The wooden board was snapped in half, with only 2 letters visible, DE. That could have been part of Big Cedar, I thought. Maybe I was close to the entrance, but the area around the sign looked untrampled, overgrown with weeds. I walked a few yards ahead, scoping out the path on foot. It was then that I smelled that faint rotting odor again, and the hair on my arms prickled. I turned around to see footprints in the soft dirt behind me. Child-sized footprints following mine, but none leading ahead. I whirled, scanning the woods. Nothing. A branch snapped to my left, and I caught a glimpse of something pale darting behind a tree. My heart thudded. I had 2 contradictory urges: run back to the safety of the van or chase after this thing. Fear and worry for the lost boy warred within me. "Micah?" I called, voice echoing. A crow cawed in the distance. The forest swallowed my words. I waited, but no response came. Shaken, I returned to the van and pressed on, forcing the vehicle onward. My mind felt raw from anxiety. A part of me whispered that I was trapped in something unnatural, but my rational side insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Eventually, I found a clearing that looked oddly familiar. My heart sank as I realized it was the very clearing where I had first set up camp. There was the weather-beaten picnic table, my old campfire spot. Had I driven in a loop? The sinking feeling in my stomach doubled when I saw my footprints from that morning fresh in the dirt. I'd somehow circled back here despite trying to leave. Tears burned at my eyes. How could I be this lost? Night was approaching again, the light already fading to a dismal gray under the cloud cover. I didn't want to risk driving in the dark, especially with the terrain so confusing. Resigned, I decided to spend another night in this dreaded campsite and try again in the morning. As twilight set in, I rummaged through my supplies. My perishable foods in the fridge were still okay, but I had limited water left, just a handful of bottled liters. Trying not to panic, I told myself I'd be fine as long as I rationed carefully. I forced myself to eat something, but each bite tasted like ash in my mouth. That evening, I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, determined not to open them for any reason. Outside, the wind hissed through the trees, and rain began to patter on the roof, intensifying the sense of isolation. My only plan was to rest, wake up early, and try again to find a way out. But the forest had other plans. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the van shaking violently, as though someone was rocking it from side to side. The overhead lights flickered on, then off again. I scrambled for my flashlight and the pepper spray I kept in the glove box. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice ragged. The rocking stopped abruptly. Then I heard a scraping noise up above, like nails on metal. Something was on the roof, trying to pry open the rooftop vent. My blood ran cold. I flicked the van's high beams on, but that only illuminated the front. The scraping persisted overhead. I wrestled the driver's seat around, preparing to start the engine and drive away, but the vent's plastic began to crack. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Silence pressed in. I was shaking, adrenaline surging. I twisted in the seat, scanning the back of the van. The overhead lights flickered on again, washing the interior in harsh yellow. For a breathless moment, I feared something would drop through the vent and land in my living space. Instead, the lights shut off again with a pop, leaving me in darkness. I panted, trying to calm down enough to focus. That was when I heard the child's voice, Micah's voice, right outside the back doors. "Ellie," he called softly, "I'm hurt." Despite everything, concern welled in me. I remembered his tiny bare feet, the cuts on his ankles. But the memory of him vanishing into the forest, the rancid smell, the footprints that appeared behind me, they all screamed to keep the doors locked. I clenched my pepper spray, my hands slick with sweat. "Please," the boy's voice pleaded from behind the van. "I need help. I'm bleeding." My soul twisted in anguish. What if it really is a child in danger? But I had witnessed too many uncanny things to ignore the possibility that this was a trick. My breath hitched. I didn't move from the driver's seat. Minutes passed with no further sound. Finally, I mustered the courage to peek through the small rear window. My flashlight cut through the dark. The clearing behind the van was empty except for the swirling rain. Something banged on the passenger side door. 3 loud, jarring thuds that made me jerk around. When I pointed the flashlight that way, there was just a flash of movement. A small hand pressed briefly against the glass, then gone. I choked back a scream, nearly dropping the light. My entire body was trembling. I don't remember how long I sat there, awake, heart hammering like a drum. Eventually, the banging stopped, the wind died, and the rain lessened. The rest of the night stretched on in tense silence. I might have dozed off once or twice, but each time I jerked awake at the slightest noise. When dawn finally broke, the relief was overwhelming. I felt like a condemned prisoner getting a last-minute pardon. But that relief evaporated when I stepped outside and walked around the van. Muddy, child-sized handprints covered the passenger door, smeared on the windows and up onto the roof. I found claw marks on the plastic vent cover, deep gouges that nearly cut through. My stomach turned to ice. No child could do that. I made a snap decision. I had to get out of these woods by any means necessary. My big worry was that I might break an axle or get stuck, but the alternative, staying here, was unthinkable. I gathered a few valuables, my wallet, the pepper spray, a flashlight, and the last water bottle, and secured them in a small backpack in case I had to abandon the van and proceed on foot. I didn't want it to come to that, but I was preparing for the worst. I climbed back into the driver's seat and tried once again to drive out, this time ignoring what the roads looked like and trusting my gut for direction. I pointed the compass app on my barely alive phone toward what I believed was north. The gauge wobbled, but I forced the van forward anyway. The forest was claustrophobic, the undergrowth scraping the van's sides, but I kept going. The hours blurred together in a haze of muddy tracks, wrong turns, and dead ends. Twice, I nearly drove into deep ravines. Another time, I discovered I'd come full circle to the same battered DE sign. I screamed in frustration, pounding the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face. This felt impossible, like the landscape itself was conspiring to keep me trapped. By mid-afternoon, the sky was a uniform steel gray, making it hard to judge the sun's position. Rain started again, heavier this time. My phone died completely around then, so I had no clock. I pushed on until the van's fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank. Every time I saw a break in the woods, it turned out to be a shallow clearing or a tangle of vines. Panic seethed under my skin. With limited water and no sense of direction, my chances of survival felt slim. Suddenly, a shape loomed in my peripheral vision. A tower of some sort rising among the pines. Hope ignited in me. It looked like an old ranger tower or a fire watch station. A tall structure with a small cabin at the top. If there was a radio or phone in that tower, I might contact help. I steered in that direction, weaving around trees, the underbrush scraping at the tires. The tower sat on a modest hill, accessible by a narrow path. It was precarious, but I managed to inch the van up until I found a small clearing next to the tower's base. I parked, the engine knocking ominously. I suspected I'd done real damage to the undercarriage from all the rough driving, but I didn't care. My only thought was to reach that tower. I grabbed my backpack, zipped up my coat, and ran through the rain toward the tower's ladder. The structure was wooden and rusted metal, about 3 stories high. The steps were slick with moss. A sign near the base read, "Danger, unsafe." But I had no other option. I climbed carefully, ignoring the way the boards groaned under my weight. Reaching the top, I found a small enclosed cabin with broken windows and a rotting door. I pushed it open. Inside, water dripped from the ceiling onto an old desk with a large radio set. Dusty, wires askew. Spiderwebs clung to every corner. The place smelled of damp, rust, and decaying wood. But there was a radio, an old shortwave set that looked maybe salvageable. I hurried over, wiping away cobwebs. The device had a crank handle on the side, presumably to power it. I started cranking, heart pounding. After about a minute, the radio sputtered to life with static. I turned the knobs, searching for any frequency. A voice crackled through. "Hello? This is Ranger Post Static. My eyes burned with relief. "Hello?" I shouted into the attached microphone. "Is anyone there? I'm lost near Big Cedar. My name is Eleanor Graves. Please respond." There was a pause. Then, faintly, I heard, "Ellie?" It was the voice of a little boy. My heart plunged into my stomach. "No," I murmured, fiddling with the dials. The station dissolved into static, then came back. "Ellie," repeated the voice, clearer now. "Ellie, let me in." "No!" I screamed at the radio. The static hissed. "God, please, someone help me." I twisted more knobs, frantic. Nothing but the child's whisper. I slammed the radio off, slumping to the floor, tears streaming. The tower had been my last hope of contacting the outside world. I looked around for any sign of a phone, but the old landline was severed. Papers on the desk crumbled in my hands. A single battered filing cabinet in the corner offered nothing but water-stained forms. Lightning flashed outside. The wind howled, rocking the tower. I realized I couldn't stay here long. The structure felt unstable, and the boy, Micah or whatever wore that skin, might come. I had no illusions anymore about him being a real child. I'd seen too many unnatural footprints, smelled that rancid stench, felt the van's roof nearly pried off. No child could do these things. But I was so exhausted that I slumped against the desk for a moment, just to catch my breath. Thunder rattled the glass shards in the broken windows. Rain misted in. My eyes drifted shut, but I forced them open. That's when I noticed a small trunk under the desk, unlocked. Hoping for flares or some kind of signal device, I opened it. Inside, I found junk. A broken flashlight, a moldy first aid kit, some rope, nails, and an old metal canister labeled rock salt. A memory flickered. I'd once read that salt was used in certain old superstitions to repel evil. It was probably nonsense, but in my desperation, the presence of rock salt felt almost like a sign. I also found a stash of iron nails, deeply rusted, possibly decades old. I had no idea if they'd be helpful, but the more I'd read about folklore in my time as a teacher and casual paranormal fan, the more I remembered the recurring theme of iron-repelling malevolent entities. It was all myth, but I was out of rational solutions. Trembling, I stuffed the canister of salt and a handful of nails into my backpack, deciding I'd figure out some way to use them if cornered by that thing. I made my way back down the tower. The rain had let up slightly, though the thunder still rumbled. My plan was simple: get to the van, gather a few more supplies, and if it refused to drive, or I couldn't navigate out, I'd go on foot. Fear of encountering that demon overshadowed my dread of the wilderness. At least on foot, I could move more easily among the trees. But as I reached the bottom of the tower, I froze. Someone stood near my van. It was Micah, hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, overalls soaked. He glanced up at me with those two bright eyes, and a smile crept across his face. It was a serene, almost kind expression, completely at odds with the horrors of the past nights. "Ellie," he said, voice carrying through the drizzle. "Come here." All my instincts screamed to run, but I had no other route to the van. I stepped forward, tightening my grip on my pepper spray. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. He tilted his head. "You lost something," he said. "Your dog, Sunny. I can bring her back." My blood ran cold. Sunny had died 2 years ago, well before I bought this RV. There was no way any random child could know about her. The mention of her name felt like a physical blow. I forced a laugh that came out as a sob. How do you know that name?" He took a slow step toward me. "I can show you. Let me in your van. You won't be alone anymore." A memory spiked in my mind. Sunny's last day at the vet, how I held her paw and sobbed. The guilt that maybe I could have spent more on treatments or caught her cancer earlier. Micah's words pierced me, stirring up that guilt like a rotting corpse from a swamp. "Stay away," I managed, backing up. "You're not a child. Just leave me alone." He smiled again. His eyes flicked to my backpack. "You think that will help you?" he asked softly. "You're just a scared woman. No one's coming. You'll die out here." My breath caught. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the sinister curve of his grin. Gathering whatever resolve I had left, I tossed the backpack onto the ground, rummaging frantically. I grabbed the canister of rock salt and wrenched it open. He frowned, stepping closer. "Ellie, let me in. You're tired. Let me help." I flung a handful of salt in front of me, half expecting it to do nothing. But when the grains hit the mud at his feet, he hissed and recoiled, lips drawing back to reveal teeth far too sharp for a child. The air filled with a stench of sulfur. My heart pounded with wild hope. I scooped more salt, tossing it in a line between us, forming a crude barrier. Micah snarled, his eyes flashing black for a moment. Then his face smoothed back into that innocent expression. "Why are you hurting me?" he whispered, voice trembling like a wounded child's. "I'm just lost." I clenched my jaw, tears in my eyes. "I'm sorry," I muttered, though I wasn't even sure to whom or for what. Then I ran to the van's side door, crossing the salted line quickly. I yanked it open, jumped in, and slammed it shut, locking it. Micah pressed a hand against the window, but I revved the engine, praying it would hold. The van coughed and rattled. I reversed, bumping over a tree root, and shot backward into the clearing. Through the windshield, I saw Micah staring after me, the rain plastering his hair to his scalp. an eerie silhouette in the gray drizzle. I sped away, not caring about the direction, just wanting distance. The van whined in protest, the tires slipping in mud. The fuel gauge hovered near empty. A new plan formed in my panic. If I couldn't outrun him or find civilization, maybe I could trap him somehow, or buy myself time to escape on foot. I thought of the outlines of old stories I'd read, salt circles, iron nails. Could I do something with the van itself? That was when I spotted a narrow offshoot leading uphill. It ended at a rocky outcrop, probably a vantage point. If I drove the van there and set a trap, maybe I could hold him at bay while I fled on foot. The idea was half-baked, but desperation fueled me. I turned off the main path, tires spinning on the incline. Lightning flashed again, revealing a stony cliff edge with a clearing large enough for the van. I parked near the cliff. The forest below stretched out, dark and endless. Rain pattered on the windshield. I rummaged in the back for anything flammable. A canister of butane for the stove, some leftover lamp oil, and I still had a lighter. My mind spun with images of fire. If salt hurt him, maybe fire could at least slow him down. If I had to, I could burn the van with him inside, or at least block his approach. As I staggered outside, carrying the butane, iron nails, and the salt, I heard a voice behind me in the van's doorway. "Ellie?" it whispered. I spun around, nearly slipping on wet stone. Micah stood there, inside my van, as if I'd invited him. A wave of horror crashed over me. I'd left the door unlocked when I scrambled out. He stared at me with glowing eyes, mouth parted in a grotesque imitation of a smile. His voice echoed with an inhuman resonance. "You can't keep me out forever." Rage and fear boiled inside me. "Get out!" I screamed, fumbling to pop the butane canister's top. He took a step forward, scanning the cramped interior of my van like he owned it. "You know I can help you," he murmured, ignoring my words. "You feel so guilty, for Sonny, for the kids you taught, for your husband, all the times you weren't enough." I choked on a sob. I hated how his words twisted the knife in my heart, dredging up all my insecurities. With shaking hands, I flicked the lighter. A small flame danced at the tip. "If you don't leave," I said, voice raw, "I'll burn this van to the ground with you in it." He stared at me, unblinking. Then his face contorted, the childish features warping. His mouth elongated, revealing rows of jagged teeth. A guttural hiss poured out. The stench of sulfur intensified, burning my nostrils. I'd never seen anything so hideous in my life. I let out a ragged scream and flicked the lighter to the butane's nozzle. A bright jet of flame roared into the van. The seats, the curtains, everything was old and likely coated in flammable residue. Fire caught on the seat cushion first, then spread with frightening speed. Micah shrieked, stumbling back. For a moment, I glimpsed his face half in shadow, a visage not remotely human. He sprang out the driver's side door with inhuman speed, hitting the ground on all fours. Rain hissed as it struck the flames, sending up plumes of smoke and steam. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the canister. My precious home on wheels, my single safe haven, was now a funeral pyre. The heat scorched my face. Micah whirled to face me, eyes blazing with fury. The flames licked at the van's interior, casting flickering light across his shape. I knew I had only seconds before the whole vehicle might explode. I fumbled for the salt canister, unscrewing the top. He lunged at me, nails bared like claws. I flung a handful of salt at him and he recoiled again, screeching. Behind him, the fire roared, the old van now fully ablaze. With the last of my strength, I spread salt across the ground in a rough semicircle, slamming rusted iron nails into the cracks between rocks, forming a makeshift barrier. Micah hissed, pacing behind that line like a caged animal. The intense heat washed over us both. The storm raged overhead, thunder booming. For a heartbeat, he locked eyes with me and his voice took on that childlike tone again, heartbreakingly innocent. "Ellie, help me, I'm scared." I knew it was a lie, but tears still welled in my eyes. I forced myself to look away, staggering toward the cliff's edge. If the circle of salt and nails held him even for a moment, maybe I had time to escape. Then came a deafening explosion as the van's fuel tank ignited. The blast knocked me forward. My head cracked against the rocky ground, and pain flared through my skull. I tasted blood. Rolling onto my back, I saw the van engulfed in a giant fireball, metal fragments raining down. The heat was searing. Micah, or the thing that called itself Micah, let out an unearthly shriek lost in the roar of flames. I forced myself to my feet, half blinded by smoke, ears ringing. I stumbled away, certain I was moments from fainting. My entire body ached. I glanced back once to see a silhouette flailing near the circle of salt. Lightning flashed, illuminating him for a split second, revealing a twisted, horned figure thrashing in the glare of the burning van. I kept running, ignoring the battered state of my legs, ignoring the cuts on my arms. The storm hammered the forest. Branches whipped at my face as I slid down the hillside, half running, half falling. My lungs burned. I lost track of how long I stumbled in the dark. At some point, I realized my left wrist might be sprained from the fall. My clothes were soaked in rain and my own sweat. But I clung to consciousness, driven by pure survival instinct. Hours could have passed, or mere minutes, before I saw distant headlights flicker through the trees. Then I saw them vanish, heard an engine. With my last ounces of energy, I screamed for help. The lights wavered, then turned in my direction. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A truck's horn blared. I collapsed in relief, lying among the wet leaves, as strong hands gripped my shoulders and voices shouted questions I couldn't answer. When I fully came to, I was in a small clinic with harsh fluorescent lights overhead. A female nurse in blue scrubs bent over me, checking my vitals. My mouth was painfully dry. My first question was, "Where am I?" She said, "A ranger found you unconscious in the forest, near Big Cedar. You have a concussion, some minor burns. You're lucky to be alive." Her tone was kind but firm. I felt tears of relief. "My name is Ellie, Eleanor Graves," I said, voice shaking. She nodded sympathetically. "We got that from your wallet, but the ranger who found you said something else. He claimed you told him a different name when he first arrived." She flipped through a clipboard. "You said your name was Micah." A cold wave of dread rippled through me. "What? No, that can't be." My head pounded. She gave me a puzzled frown. "You were delirious, probably from the concussion. Don't worry." She set the clipboard aside, offered me water from a plastic cup. "You need rest." I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. Did anyone else come out of those woods? A child?" Her expression turned guarded. "No. The ranger found you alone." She hesitated. "But if there was a child lost out there, we'll keep searching." I nodded, though my gut told me they'd find no trace. No footprints, no overalls, nothing. I lay back, letting exhaustion pull at me. My mind drifted to the van. I wondered if they'd discover the burnt wreck on that cliff. Would they think I set it on fire by accident? Would they see signs of inhuman claw marks? I'm writing this now from that same clinic bed, my bandaged arm propped up on pillows, the steady beep of the monitor at my side. The staff here is polite, but they keep exchanging puzzled looks whenever I bring up a demon disguised as a child. They probably think I'm traumatized or losing my mind. I don't know if I truly destroyed that thing in the fire, or if it merely fled back into the depths of the forest. I do know I'll never forget its eyes, that soft voice, that vile stench. Sometimes in the night, I hear tapping at the walls or the faint hum of a child's lullaby through the hospital vents. Maybe it's just my imagination, or perhaps the demon lingers like an echo in my mind, reminding me of the guilt and fear it feasted on. I'm alive, but my sense of safety is gone. The doctors say I'll recover physically, but how do I recover from the knowledge that something so evil can wear the face of a small, helpless boy, whisper my dog's name, and promise me the solace I crave? If anyone reads this, I hope you believe me. And if you ever find yourself alone in the deep forests of southeastern Oklahoma, or anywhere else rumored to be haunted, if you hear a child's voice outside your camper door, pleading to be let in, don't. No matter how lost or desperate you feel, don't open that door. Some things in this world feed on our guilt and pain, and they will use our softest memories to destroy us. Stay strong, stay safe, because once it finds that crack in your resolve, it's already far too late. 01